Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Power of Love radio show, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. What is today's date? Does anyone know? September 7th.
September
2016. Welcome to the Power of Love radio show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. We believe that through the power of love, that nothing is impossible with love on your side. I am TJ Jackson, and I'm here with my two older brothers, Taj and Terrell, and our good friend, Henry Hebert. What's going on?
Hello.
Everyone?
What's going on, T?
So we are live, so if you're listening to us right now, thank you for joining us. And this is show number 5.
Wow. 5.
We're doing it.
Yep.
Later on, we will be opening up to take a few questions via Twitter. So if you have a question about our topic, which is loss and grief, and you want to ask, then send us a tweet at DDJ Foundation.
And here's my disclaimer. We aren't licensed therapists.
No, we're not.
We're people who've experienced death and loss and are sharing our experiences to try to help those who have also been impacted by it. Now, this week we have an awesome show because we are going... No hoping. We have an awesome show.
Okay.
We're going to learn about the steps to recovery for grief, which is awesome. We're going to learn about signs people show when they're experiencing grief. We are going to learn about the different types of losses. And we're also going to learn how grief gets misdiagnosed. This happens all the time. And we're going to learn about much, much more. So I'm excited. Let's get into it.
So am I. So last week, our guest, Sharon Ellers, shared with us how the suicides of a close friend and a former fiance within a 2-year period affected her and what she did that helped her. Well, after working in corporate America for almost 30 years, Sharon decided to start her own company to offer a multi-dimensional approach to grief through emotional recovery and spiritual healing. She's now a certified grief recovery specialist with the Grief Recovery Institute and a Reiki master. Sharon is helping others to heal and recover from grief by providing them with a safe, compassionate, and healing environment for their journey. And today we brought Sharon back to tell us about this approach. Welcome back, Sharon.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Sharon was awesome last
She
week.
was.
So
Thank
we all
you.
felt you had to come back. So thank you
And
for
we have
coming
so much
back.
more to learn from you.
Oh,
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
So, first question. What is a grief recovery specialist?
A grief recovery specialist goes through a particular program through the Grief Recovery Institute here in Sherman Oaks to help us learn the process and the actions that it takes to get through unresolved grief. We go through the program ourselves and we work on our own losses, and then we have the ability to work with other people in helping them get through their grief.
So can you explain what is grief recovery method? Like, what does that mean?
The Grief Recovery Method is an actionable program that helps you get through the difficult emotions associated with the pain and loss dealing with grief. And a lot of times, we don't have the opportunity to really address those things. We just sort of push them down and tuck them away and let them fester. And the Grief Recovery Method gives you those actions that you need to deal with those and to move forward with your grief.
I don't even think people realize that there is an actionable process to get through grief.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there is an actionable process, and this is part of what we teach. Becoming aware of your losses in your life and how many you've had. Sometimes you've had all kinds of losses. Accepting responsibility for those losses, getting through them, doing the recovery communications, the apologies, the forgivenesses, taking the action steps to move forward.
And how long has this been around?
The grief recovery method has actually been around for about 35 years, which is hard to believe. I didn't know until I was grieving that it existed, but it's been around for about 35 years.
And this came through research? Like, how did they figure this method out?
Well, John James, who's the original founder of the grief recovery method, had lost an infant son soon after birth, and as a part of his grieving process back in the 70s, realized that there wasn't really anything available to him to help him get through his grief. So after going through a divorce, he decided that he would, pull this program together and study grief more deeply.
And how does grief recovery method define grief?
There's a number of definitions, but it's primarily the normal and natural reaction to loss. It's an emotional response to losing somebody in your life or to having a event happen, as well as it is reaching out for someone who's always been there, only to realize that when you need them one more time, they're no longer there. It's a change in, your typical pattern of behavior. It's making things, it's things that are different in your life and your reaction to those, and that could mean a number of things.
So I think in the book it talks about grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in familiar pattern of behavior, which when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, this is so interesting that I didn't realize that I had conflicting feelings when I lost my friend, when my friend Jeremy died.
Right.
That I was happy that he was no longer in pain, but yet I also, really missed him and him actually being able to talk to him. So is that what they mean by conflicting feelings?
Exactly correct. And for things like divorce, for example, you may be relieved that you're no longer in the relationship, but you're also expressing sadness for the future, unmet hopes and dreams that aren't going to happen as well. And so you feel very conflicted in feeling those things simultaneously.
And so are there signs that people are going through grief?
There are so many different common responses that we tend to forget about. Reduced concentration is one of the primary ones. You just can't focus. You just don't feel like you're 100% there. You almost feel like you're walking around in a fog. That's a big one. I think we talked about last week, it takes maybe 4 to 6 seconds longer for a griever to even respond to anything because their mind is sort of not in the present moment. You have a roller coaster of emotions. You can be up one day, you can be down for a number of days after that. You can also have a change in your sleeping patterns. You sleep a lot. Some people, crawl in bed and put the covers over their head and that's it. And others like me who don't sleep are up at night, trying to figure out life. And then food, you either eat everything inside or you don't eat anything at all, right? Some people just go straight for the chocolate cake, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And
I always do that anyway.
And then others couldn't even, the sight of food makes them sick to their stomach. So those are all very normal and natural reactions to loss.
So, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but there's a diagnosis you can do for someone besides, is it basically, are all these things you mentioned pretty much how you would diagnose if someone is going through grief?
Yes.
Is there a doctor you could see to diagnose, or is this kind of, you have to kind of make that decision?
Does it get misdiagnosed?
I think what happens more is that it gets misdiagnosed. We're taught not to be sad. So as soon as we're grieving or trying to recover from a loss and we start to feel sad and we think something's wrong with us, and so we go to the doctor, oftentimes it's diagnosed rather than as grief, which is normal and natural, as being depression. And the doctor is very, apt to maybe put you on some medication, which for all intents and purposes masks your grief rather than allows you to address it. Yeah. So a lot of times grief gets misdiagnosed.
Well, even when you were saying one day you can be up and the next day you can be down, that could sound like a whole nother, like if you go into a doctor and say I'm happy and then I'm sad, you could really be misdiagnosed into a whole nother category.
Right, and I think that's why it's so important that if you're not feeling 100%, to know that those reactions to grief are absolutely normal. I think we start, because we don't talk about it enough, people start to get worried that what they're going through is abnormal. And in that sense, they go to the doctor, and maybe they haven't told the doctor that they're grieving, and the doctor just figures they're depressed.
I think a lot of times, too, people assume if they experience a loss that after a certain amount of time, the loss is no longer valid to be acting a certain way. And, I think a loss can stay with you for literally years and decades. So I think people have to respect that grief, if it's not handled properly, will stay with you.
And what about are there like stages to the loss? Do you check them off one by one?
Well, I think in reality, everybody grieves individually because your relationship with the person or the event is a unique relationship. And I think what happens is that people feel that they have to be going through these 5 stages of grief, which include anger and depression and all of these things. In reality, it isn't linear. It's not sequential. It's kind of all over the place, and it's unique to you. So I'm not going to grieve the same way that Henry will grieve, and the way that you would grieve. We all
not everybody's grieving like me.
We all grieve differently. We all grieve
Really?
differently. There's no real, you can't map it out because everybody has a different relationship that they're grieving for.
But I've always been taught that in terms of the stages of grief, like first there's denial, and then is that true?
I think what happened was when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about the 5 stages of grief, she really wrote that for people who were facing terminal illness and what they would be going through. And unfortunately, it got applied to what all grievers go through, and that's not really the reality. And people get so caught up worried about what stage they're in that they forget to actually grieve. So no, it's not really applicable to the grieving process because everybody, like we said, has an individual relationship with the situation, and they're going to grieve in the way that's right for them.
So you could be sad one day, in denial the next day. You could be angry the next day, happy the next day.
You can be all of that in one day. That's unfortunately the difficulty of grief and loss.
So what are the other types of losses, like a breakup in a relationship, divorce, loss of health, loss of career, financial issues, loss of faith, death of a pet? What about even if you've grown up in a dysfunctional home or you have like an alcoholic with alcoholic parents? Are all these like major loss events that can also contribute to grief, and also kind of the grief recovery method apply to it?
Yes, absolutely. There's about 43 different loss experiences that we can go through in our life. Something that may seem as simple as graduating from college and going out into the real world, right? Where you have to face the fact that you're not in a secluded little world anymore.
Is that one of the 43?
Yeah, it can be a grieving experience.
Wow.
Going from high school and moving into college.
Because you're happy and then you're sad because you're leaving something behind. So it's the conflicting emotions in terms of the definition that.
That's
right.
pretty amazing.
You're not a kid anymore, right? Now you have to be an adult. Now you have to be away from home. So that's a very good example of a grief experience that we don't normally think about.
Absolutely.
What about moving?
Moving, as a mom, your kids going away to school is a grieving experience. Having a miscarriage, infertility is a grieving experience. Loss of trust, loss of safety. People who don't feel safe, that affects you as a grieving experience as well. If somebody's let you down, if your belief in God has changed, religion, loss of faith is huge, a huge grieving experience. You thought God would be there and he wasn't,
So the word recovery, what does that mean? Like, I think I have an idea, but specifically, is there a certain thing I'm looking for when the word recovery?
I think with recovery, grief is often intellectualized instead of looked at from an emotional perspective. And recovery means taking the perspective that you're going to look at it with your heart and not your head. We tend to think our way through things. We're like, if I only do this and I analyze it, then I'm going to be okay. But the thing about grief is feeling it. So recovering means claiming your circumstances, knowing that it's okay to be sad when you're grieving and accepting that and not trying to push it away or pretend like it's not happening.
So facing it.
Facing it, absolutely.
And then how do you recover from grief?
Well, there's a series of actions that you have to go through the grief recovery program, and one of them is being aware of how you deal with grief in your life, the kinds of losses that may still be causing you pain, and we go back and look, we actually create a loss history graph, go back through our lives and look at the things that may have caused us pain, and then how we deal with them. Have we faced them? Have we pushed them aside? Have we compartmented them somewhere nicely where they're just floating along? Taking those things, accepting responsibility. We have to take at least 1% responsibility for the things that we do. And not,
including our feelings, like our own feelings, instead of pushing the blame onto someone else.
Right, and pushing the blame on other people, you make them responsible for fixing it. And really the only person that can fix it is you. And so that's one of the big things, is taking responsibility for how you react, at least 1% responsibility for how you react to your situations with loss. Looking at the recovery communications, which includes, apologizing, which we don't always like to do, forgiving, which we certainly don't like to do sometimes, and then those things that were left unsaid. I wished I had done this, I wished I had said this, I wish I hadn't said this, and kind of bringing those things forward.
And that comes to forgiveness, though, too. Forgiveness of self and then others.
Forgiveness, sometimes more of yourself than of the other person, especially when somebody's passed away. And for me, thinking about my friends, what could I have done differently so that they didn't commit suicide? Well, I had no say into that. That was their choice. And so therefore, I have to forgive myself, and I have to let go of those things so that I can move forward.
Terrell and I are parents, and as a parent, if our child experiences some type of grief, what would you recommend us do as parents for them?
The best thing for parents to do, for adults to do, is to be honest about their own grief and not try to hide it, because then kids will think it's not safe to talk about being sad. So if you're sad, or if you experienced something similar when you were younger, let's say a pet dies, you can talk about how you felt when your pet died and how it made you feel, and that gives them permission. They take cues from adults, so it gives them the permission to feel those things and to express those things and know that it's healthy and it's okay.
So in the book, they said most important recovery means acquiring the skills that we should have been taught in childhood, which I think is really interesting, that we weren't taught these skills as children. And then these skills allow us to deal with loss directly. And I also think what TJ was asking too, just in terms of being a parent, in terms of loss. So would it be the case then, say as adults, you go through the grief recovery method and you learn these skills, and then you're able to then help your own children out by when they have lost? Like, I mean, I'll be honest, in high school, when I had that first boyfriend that broke my heart, if my mom, I had understood these skills to then give me those skills back then, I'd be in a whole different situation in terms of how I looked at loss and grief. Mm-hmm. But she just didn't know.
Absolutely. And I think that's how we were raised.
Is that something, I don't know if that's what you were asking,
Absolutely. I just think as a parent, I guess the answer is you got to be able to relate to them and just be honest and share your own personal experiences with them, so they don't feel alone.
Well, it could be anything too,
and
even
they feel
like
comfortable
playing sports too. Like if you
when
lose
they
a game,
exactly.
you could apply it to that as well.
Well, I didn't lose, so
you never lose. So in terms of, I also thought something was interesting is they talk about how we're taught how to acquire things, but we're not taught what to do when we lose them.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think society has put us in a situation where, it's all about acquiring, whether it's materialistic kinds of things, whether it's financial, whatever. But then there is really no discussion about what you do when you lose it. And so you hear people who've gone bankrupt, taking extreme action because the failure that they feel from that, is not attributable. So, yeah, we've spent too much time worrying and not really dealing with loss in general and what you do when you do lose something.
Because just even looking back at my own childhood and from reading the book, they talk about how we try to acquire parents' praise. And it could even go from later on to trying to acquire toys by being good. And you don't realize that you're being taught to acquire, but then once you lose that toy per se and you feel that feeling of sadness or something being taken away and somebody's not giving it to you, could then go into like rejection almost.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And you're left with these difficult emotions, but then you're told to be happy about.
And
or to be strong.
And for me, I'm guilty of that, because if my kids lose something, I'll say it's part of life, and that's it. It's like, just deal with it kind of thing. So I'm at fault there as well.
So when he's saying it's part of life, like what is that called in the grief recovery method?
It's part of life. I think it's...
Is that like intellectualizing? Is that like something we say?
I think that's
Is
intellectualizing it, and I think, if you speak from your heart and you say, I know you're really sad. I know you must really be sad that you lost your favorite Fluffy. I felt that way when I lost my Fluffy, but, and then you can kind of quantify it. But I think acknowledging and recognizing the emotions the child's feeling with it, that way they won't start to block them and hide them and take them into their adulthood, like probably we've all done.
Because does that go with the myths then that we're taught about in dealing with grief? Like, don't feel bad, replace the loss, grieve alone,
right? And
be
I think
strong for others.
Exactly, and I think the myths have been passed down, unfortunately, from generation to generation, whether we realize it or not, that, you should be grieving alone, that you should be strong for, especially as a sibling, you should be strong for, for others.
So, TJ, you're not alone.
No, yeah, I'm guilty. So
you're just one of many.
I know. It's true, though. Some of those phrases I do find myself saying, thinking that's the proper way to handle it. And, because you hear life isn't fair. And I do believe life isn't fair. So it's like, that's part of life, or just deal with it, or, you gotta just get stronger from it. Those are phrases that come out of my mouth sometimes. So I'm guilty of that. I gotta figure a way to kind of relate to it.
I realize that when I say a phrase like that, that I'm not hearing what the person's actually saying and hearing their emotion. If somebody says, oh, I just broke up with so-and-so and I'm feeling sad, I sometimes say, well, there's plenty of fish in the sea. There's someone else. Right. and then I realize I've not even heard what they've said. And here they are, then they shut down.
Because you're just trying to make them stronger and trying to uplift
I'm intellectualizing it, though.
Yes, absolutely.
But I'm not hearing them. And in that moment, it's like they either want a hug or they just want to be heard.
Yeah.
And hearing their feelings, not their intelligence.
Right. I think that's the most important point, is that grievers want to be heard. They want to be able to share their story. They don't want to be analyzed or criticized or judged. They want to be able to share their emotions, and they don't want you to intellectualize with them.
Not to steer us in a completely different direction, but I believe you said something last week, something to the effect of, the deeper your love, the harder the grief, or something like that, I think.
Yes, I said that.
And we all have different experiences, and we all have different relationships and things. So, and I think I know the answer to this. What is the time limit? What is the time frame? Because we're all different, and we all deal with things differently. And there's triggers. It's like my brothers and I, obviously we've lost our mother and our uncle, and we're now in September, but August is a tough month for us. And it seems like, it's been over 20 years that I've lost, that we've lost our mother, and I'm still in a position, I'm still in a spot where it's very difficult for me. I think it feels like, it just happened, and every time that time comes, it's like you relive it.
Yeah, and first of all, I'm sorry for your losses, both of those. I can't imagine what you went through. I think it's one of those myths that we've been taught, that time heals all wounds, and in reality, time doesn't heal. And I think we're waiting for that switch to say, that switch to flip, to say that, okay, you're done, but we're never done. So part of the grief recovery method teaches you how to let go of the pain that's associated with your grieving, and so that you can still have fond emotions, you can still be sad, but it's not painful. And I think the fact that there are triggers is healthy, because you love that person with your whole entire heart. And so choosing to remember them, rather than having those special days sort of be like these beacons that are flashing in front of you, like, I can't. My friend Joy died October 10th, so that's coming up. And so in the beginning, it was really hard to face that. But now I think I welcome that day, because it allows me to remember the good stuff about her. It allows me to think about her, allows me to talk to other people about it. And I think if we put this false sense of time will make it better, that doesn't necessarily happen. You can let go of the pain associated with it, but you're always going to have those fond memories. You're always going to feel some sort of sadness, and I don't think that ever goes away. You just have to embrace it and accept it.
I think what you said, which was really interesting, is going through this process, you learn to let go of the pain because you were heartbroken, and that's something that the program talks about, being heartbroken.
Yes.
And you let go of the pain, and once you're able to let go of the pain through going through the steps of the process, you then discovered that you were in this space of being able to have fond memories and not being so associated with the pain.
Right, absolutely. With joy in the beginning, because I hadn't addressed this, I mean, joy's name is Christmas, right? I mean, you can't walk anywhere where you don't see the word joy. And I avoided going out during the holidays for that reason. After taking the program, I realized that it wasn't really her name out there. It was really the things I hadn't addressed. So now I actually welcome walking into Michael's and seeing the word joy. It reminds me of her and the crazy blonde jokes and shopping at, all hours of the day and night.
And then the things that you were saying that you hadn't addressed, I think, is it similar then in terms of what Terrell is saying about triggers? Because right. I always, I think a therapist has once told me that triggers are just for you to kind of see what's happening and for you to become aware, because it's something that's been buried that you may not be aware of. Exactly. And so to start noticing where those emotions and what trigger, and then kind of looking within yourself.
Well, there's so many things that are unresolved when somebody passes away, right? Or when in a relationship, the things that you didn't get to do, or the things that you wished you had done differently, or the hopes and dreams that you had for the future. And so through the program, it gives you an opportunity to kind of actually address those things, say them out loud, get through them so that they're not buried, kind of, festering, waiting to kind of bubble out and explode.
Will grief always be tricky? And what I mean by that is there's times where I can hear my uncle's music and it'll make me smile. And then there's times where I could hear his music and it'll make me cry. Is it always going to be like that?
That is the unfortunate part of grief, yeah. And I think facing that there are going to be happy times and there are going to be sad times associated with it is important, because the memories that are brought forward aren't always going to be happy, and you have to take an honest, objective look and say, life isn't just happy and life isn't just sad. So we're going to have days where we're going to have both happy and sad emotions, and that's normal and natural, and that's what it means to be human.
One of the things I'm always lost on is if a friend or family member loses someone that's very dear to them, I'm just speechless. I don't know really how to approach that. Is there any advice you would give me if my best friend lost a parent or a family member?
Yeah, the best thing to say is that you don't know what to say, and you said it perfectly. I mean, because what are the words? I mean, if we intellectualize it, we say those things that we've been taught to say, like they're in a better place, or they're not having any more pain. That doesn't really help your friend's heart. And I think last week we talked about hugs. I think saying you don't know what to say, I'm sorry for your loss, I can't imagine what you're going through, and then giving that person a hug is probably the best thing that you can do for them. And then being there to just listen and let them tell their story, because again, grievers just want to be heard. They don't want to be analyzed or judged, but just being there as a friend, checking in on them, making sure that they're okay.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to also say, but we ran out of time. You mentioned double grief, right? How important it is, if you know somebody that's going through something, how important it is for you to be there, because if you're not there and they need you, they can experience the double grief.
It's like getting hit twice, right? Not only have you lost your loved one, but then your friends are avoiding you. And I felt that way too. I felt very isolated and alone because people didn't know what to say, so they stayed away. And so you're not only grieving for your loss, but you're grieving for the loss of your friendship. So you're absolutely right, reaching out. And again, even if you don't know what to say, just say that. I don't know what to say, but I'm here. If you ever need, a hug or to listen, just being there. I think that's the best gift as a friend. I wished I had had more of that when I was grieving.
What I think is also interesting, the book talks about how a lot of people are afraid of feelings, specifically like negative emotions. And I think because in our society we're taught to smile, everything's amazing and great. And you're taught to get a hold of yourself, you can't possibly fall apart. And I, just looking back now in my so many years, I've realized that there's moments where I've tried to have that moment where I've reached out to people, and because of the flurry of emotions, it hasn't come out in a way that's been so just calm and beautiful. Mm-hmm. As negative emotions sometimes volcano up. And I've had friends that have just reacted in a way that caused me probably the double grief in terms of the rejection. And then I'm left with how I felt before and then afterwards. And I think it's now I'm learning though, it's as a society, we've been taught to kind of move through our world like that. And so now I actually have a lot more compassion just for like my friends and my family, because they didn't know either, and they didn't realize that this was happening, because we don't understand. We're not really understanding as a society emotions in general, the positive and negative, and how negative can actually be really helpful.
Well, and when you're grieving, you're so all over the place. You don't even know how you're going to react sometimes. So it's important that your friends are there and try to understand and not take it personally. And that's what we tend to do when somebody reacts like that, is we make it all about us rather than, like you said, being compassionate and looking at the other person and trying to understand what they're going through.
We have Sharon Ehlers with us. And Sharon, I'm such a big fan of you. So thank you for being here with us. And through our foundation, the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, we are shining a light on loss and grief and how it impacts us. And to all of our listeners, we want to know what your story of loss and grief is. How have you been able to cope? We are building a community, so we need your help. And if you're just tuning in and want to learn more about the foundation, go to www.ddjf.org.
Good job.
Felt like I threw an extra D in for some reason. www.ddjf.org.
Once again, we are live on the Power of Love radio show. If you are listening to us right now, thank you for joining us. Later on in our show, we will open it up to taking a few questions via Twitter. So if you have a specific question for Sharon on our topic of loss and grief, then send us a tweet at DDJ Foundation.
And Taj is over there on the computer just checking out tweets. Right,
That's
Taj?
odd. Yeah.
There it is, Taj
The
Jackson.
suspense.
So last week, I found something that was actually really cool, and I was surprised to hear it. And Miss Henry's going to share what I found out last week, right?
Conveniently, I told you guys once we were off air.
Yeah, exactly. And I said that. I said, why didn't you say that while we were here?
Exactly. Well, I am going through the 7-week grief recovery method with Sharon, and I just completed week 2 on Sunday with Sharon.
Sweet.
And it's been really interesting. I'm definitely, one of the things I'm learning, there's a lot I'm learning actually. One of them is that people tend to say I'm fine, and I'm so guilty of saying I'm fine. I do it all the time. And then I've just really learned how much we don't talk about, even though our foundation is about loss and grief. I'm really learning about how much we don't talk about loss and grief as a society. And through this program, it's amazing now to kind of, I've tried over the years to improve my well-being in many, many ways, and I just always had this lingering feeling that I wasn't understanding something about how I was feeling. And now I've begun utilizing these tools to connect the dots for myself about how much loss and grief that I've experienced, which really has negatively impacted me in ways that I didn't even realize until this program.
So what have you realized that has really helped you?
Well, let me tell you. There are other loss experiences that can produce grief in our everyday world that I didn't know about. I really just thought if a loved one died or a pet died, that was grief and that was it. Mm-hmm. But it's not just death of a loved one or a pet, but there's relationship breakup, end of addictions, or even like happy events like you mentioned before, graduating, marriage, or even major health changes, retirement, financial changes, positive or negative, holidays, legal problems, empty nest. And, the book actually talks about how often these common life experiences are not seen as grieving events, but they really are, which I, now looking at like my life in the last 5 years, my best friend Jeremy died 5 years ago. I've experienced a loved one dying. As a producer in reality TV, I would move shows every 3 months, so I was constantly saying goodbye to people that I enjoyed working with. So that was another loss and grief. Through losing my best friend Jeremy, I actually, some of my friends didn't know how to handle my grief because I was no longer happy Henry, which is probably where the I'm fine came from. I actually lost a couple friends because they just didn't know what to do, and they just thought, oh, I don't know, she's no longer happy, so let me exit this right now, which then caused me to have the double grief, which I'm now realizing. And so I have more compassion for my friends now. And then I actually, my dog of 12 years died, and then I moved to a new neighborhood, so I said goodbye to people that I loved being with, that I was there for 6 years, and I had some health challenges just from a stressful work environment. And so now I look at all this and I'm like, wow, this is just in 5 years. And in the last couple years, I've just been wondering, like, how can I feel better? And I've been seeing all these other people, and really I wasn't addressing what was happening, which was the loss and grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I already feel better just in 2 weeks, because I think part of it is just understanding what I was actually going through. And I think I was looking outside of myself for someone just to tell me, hey, this is what's happening to you.
No, that's great. That's great.
Does that make sense?
It does. And
I mean, you know what the biggest one is actually? Loss of trust. I didn't realize loss of trust, how you can have grief from that. And I can look back into my childhood, and I had certain moments where, like, loss of trust with a teacher, or loss of trust with just, anyone. And now I realize as an adult how much that's affected me, or even loss of trust, just as an adult with people. Have you guys experienced, like, loss of trust?
Yeah. We're in the music industry, and in the music industry, that can happen quite a bit.
Would you ever think loss of trust was one?
I would.
You're asking.
I think
Yeah.
it would have
With grief?
Yeah, it would.
Oh no, I wouldn't equate it to grief.
grief.
No, I wouldn't equate it to grief. That's for sure.
Well,
I think you're not to
But
grief.
now you're
because a
thinking
loss
about
of
it.
trust. Well, it depends who the trust is from. I mean,
It makes
if
sense,
it's from
though.
your best friend, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
But
'cause
even
you would lose a friend.
But even
Lose
like
something
little
that.
losses of trust can add up and kind of it's like a disappointment in humanity. Even that at that small level, it's like disappointing. There's times where if I'm I don't really watch the news, but if someone's watching the news and I see something that's just sad, and you wouldn't think I'm grieving, but in reality, just that sad story about a loss or something can actually affect you. So maybe that's why I don't watch the news, because I don't,
But isn't it interesting how you're now thinking back to those
Absolutely.
moments, which is kind of what's happening through me through this process of the last 2 weeks. I'm actually looking back at my life and kind of noticing, oh, that's what was happening at that moment.
So I'm going to declare something. I've always said in our schools there should be more financial, requirement financial classes that are
Financial
required.
literacy.
Yeah, financial. I'm going to also declare there should be some grief literacy and grief understanding
I agree.
classes.
Emotions, an emotional literacy class.
We grow up, like I've said before, I don't know if I said it here, but we grow up celebrating when we win. We get trophies and we all have fun and everything, but we have to learn how to understand and deal and cope with loss. And I think that's something that our entire society kind of overlooks.
I agree. So we do have some listeners that have asked us about relationships, and so I'm going to ask you, Sharon, can we use my broken relationship as... I forgot to mention that in the 5 years. I said goodbye to somebody that I was in love with because it just wasn't... We don't live in the same city. That broke my heart. And a year later, I'm still trying to recover from it. So can we use my broken romantic relationship as an example of how grief recovery may possibly help me, which will also explain to our listeners how grief recovery method does work?
Absolutely. It's a good example because there's, especially in a breakup, if you haven't resolved things, there's these unresolved grieving issues or loss issues between. If you don't face those and you don't address them, then you carry them with you to the next relationship, and it becomes emotional baggage.
So I
don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I haven't broken up in 2 decades, but my question is...
You want to know what it's like?
What is the proper way to break up? Because if you have to kind of resolve issues, a lot of times that quickly tips into back in a relationship, and some people have the mentality, I better just, delete them from my phone or delete her from my phone and just move on,
Yeah, I think it's impossible to actually sit down with somebody and try to work these things out. And sometimes you don't want to, right? It's not the healthiest thing to do, but you have to do it for yourself.
Okay.
So you have to be introspective and look at yourself objectively and say, okay, again, what is the awareness of the things that I did or didn't bring into the relationship? What are the things that I could have done differently? What responsibility or accountability do I take for why things did or didn't work out? And address those things rather than pushing them all down and pretending like they didn't happen, because that's when you carry it into the next relationship and the poor guy won't know what hit him, right?
I think the hardest part too in terms of like a broken relationship, like in thinking about how you feel sad, but at the same time you do have the conflicting feeling of like, okay, in my heart I understand that it's time to move on and that there's hope for the future. but yet you still can get sucked back into the sadness and the hope of why didn't it work out in the past and we were so in love.
Yeah, I think admitting and looking that there were probably certain hopes and dreams for the future. I mean, that a lot of times with the breakup, you may be happy. I said, like with my divorce, you know, I knew it was the right thing to do intellectually, right? It was the right thing to do. But emotionally, it doesn't mean that I wasn't sad about it, because we had hopes and dreams for the future, right? We had kids, we were going to retire, we were going to have the house in the country, whatever it was. And those things now aren't going to happen anymore. And so recognizing that it's healthy and normal to be sad about those things is probably the right way to go.
So then can a person get over losing like a loved one, whether in death or from a breakup?
There's a difference between getting over and letting go of pain. So I think a person can let go of the pain and move forward. I think that's a healthier way to look at it.
So are there habits or like, you know, do you have to develop new habits for this? Like, what is the kind of course of action?
Well, a lot of it is looking at how you actually deal with loss and grief in your own life. You know, do you approach it or do you avoid it? And for people who avoid it, it's much more difficult because they tend to push it down and compartmentalize it so that it doesn't rear its ugly head. And so part of the relationship thing is to allow the emotions to come forward in a healthy and honest way.
So when we're pushing down the emotions, is that what's called the unresolved grief?
That's unresolved grief, and oftentimes we use other short-term energy relieving kinds of behaviors to mask the grief, like working, you know, workaholism, shopping, over-exercising.
That was interesting, realizing the short-term, is it called short-term energy
relieving?
So basically, so basically this is what I learned from myself.
Share.
So when you're going through loss and grief, you are pushing down all these feelings, and you all of a sudden you'll go to food or whatever your short-term energy release is, because the energy, it's emotion. I mean,
it's almost like you get a euphoria. I don't know it's a replacement, right?
Well, when you're going through grief and loss, there's a certain amount of energy that it takes, and so it's depleting you essentially of energy, and you don't realize how much energy it's taking you to process the grief and loss because you're actually pushing it down. But you will want to feel better, and you don't even realize why you want to feel better. So then next thing you know, you find yourself reaching for food or reaching for alcohol, and basically it's something that's short term that's going to make you feel better, when the reality is you're processing grief and loss, and you have no idea that you're processing the grief and loss. You just want to feel better. So you reach for the food, you reach for the alcohol, or you go exercise, or it could be workaholic too. You become, I was working 80-hour weeks. I was trying to push away the grief.
And then in doing all that, you don't even tackle the grief aspect.
Yeah.
So
it
then
could be
you're
shopping
still
too,
at step one.
watching too much television. Guilty. I looked at the list and I was like, there's food. I was like, working too much. Oh my God. I was like, TV, too much television. I've done the retail therapy.
Yeah.
I literally was checking the list, except for a few of them.
Yeah,
Wow.
TJ made an important point that you don't address your grief when you're doing those things because you're feeling better. You know, the chocolate cake makes you feel better, but the grief is not being.
I was working, I will admit it, during X Factor, I was working 80-hour weeks. And then I was coming home at like 2 a.m, knowing I did not have any food in my fridge. I would stop off and buy pizza rolls. And I became like sort of addicted to like pizza rolls. I will admit that. and then I eventually went and saw a nutritionist, and she's like, "What are you doing? There's no nutrition in pizza rolls." But I realized now I was trying to cope with my grief of losing Jeremy.
Right.
Wow.
Well, we are building a community of support on our social media. Taj, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We have a couple questions.
Nice.
One is from Betty. Betty wants to know, she says, I lost a high school friend and beyond a couple of days ago. I'm wondering, what is the strategy to cope with wakes/funerals and the wake and funerals tomorrow for her?
It is a good question, and I think because of what society has taught us to do, most times people tend to avoid those because they don't want to express their emotions, when in reality it's much more healthy, and it's actually I don't want to say sanctioned, safe place, but you know, if you're going to grieve, a wake or a funeral is the place to go. And being in a community where you can show your emotions, where people are reaching out and together is a very healthy thing. So facing the wake and the funeral is probably the best way to go for you emotionally.
You also said something, I think last week, about after you go to a wake or a funeral, you can have like 3 weeks where you get sick. Can you explain that?
I think what happens, and you just mentioned it, is that grief is an energy depleting emotion, and the emotions associated with grieving, just wipe you out. A lot of times that brings your resistance down, that brings your health into a place where you end up being more prone to illnesses and accidents. So grievers are often very much in the sense of getting sick, after they've been through one of those experiences. But if you let the emotions come out and you share those emotions, you have a better chance of not going to that place.
And what's interesting is if you do get sick, people might end up saying like, oh, I just caught a cold or I got the flu, not realizing that it may have come from, may have been triggered from the loss and grief, because you are essentially repressing it. And like you said, the grief is a certain amount of energy too.
Exactly. That's why if you go to the doctor, it's important to let them know emotionally what's going on in your life. It helps them to see the bigger picture when they're diagnosing you.
Taj, another one?
Yeah, well, Lori,
got time.
she said, so happy Sharon is on again.
Hey, Sharon's the best, I'm telling you.
She's amazing.
We agree. And someone wants to know, Edwina wants to know, Taj, Terrell, TJ, has the children in your music therapy class explained to you how the music therapy helped them with their grief?
I've definitely seen it. I mean, now when we go back, they're hugging us, and it's awesome, to be honest. I don't want to say it's sad because that's the wrong word.
I think you had mentioned before just watching them become more open to and expressing their feelings and their stories. That we saw that week by week.
They're so sweet, too.
Yeah.
They really are. They're beautiful kids. And
then Cameron is our music therapist who's licensed. He assesses them every week. So he's able to tell us and share where they are, too, at every milestone.
Right.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Sarah has a birthday. She's listening to us.
Happy birthday, Sarah.
Happy birthday!
All right. Cool.
All right. So is there any other tips or anything else that you'd want to share with us that we missed, Sharon?
I think one of the things that we talked about a little bit was, taking that responsibility. I think that's an important something important that people need to remember, is that we have accountability for taking at least 1% responsibility. Otherwise, we become victims, and you don't want to become a victim to your grief. You don't want it to be a badge that you wear proudly. I didn't want to wear that badge, that I was a survivor of 2 friends to suicide. I wanted to be able to address my grief and move forward, because I know my friends wouldn't want me to be stuck in that pain associated with it. So, if you don't take responsibility...
And is it responsibility for your feelings?
It's responsibility for how you react and your feelings to the losses. Taking responsibility in that sense and not allowing or putting the blame on other people so that they have, it's up to them to fix it, which, in some cases they may not.
And is it, and I'll give you an example, like, so if I'm feeling sad and someone calls me and they trigger me, I can't say then this person made me feel sad. It's my own responsibility in terms of my own feelings. Exactly. That person just may have been calling and said something, and maybe it's the natural process in terms of the healing as well that's happening.
We use the example of sitting.
So it's kind of like learning how to workshop with each other and how to move through the negative emotions, because ultimately, as a society, we're not really taught how to do that with one another. So it's kind of having like compassion and patience with one another to have true understanding, to grow.
Right. It's like sitting at a stoplight and having somebody not move forward when the light turns green, and you have a choice of how you're going to react. You can either honk the horn, or you can, just take it in stride. You can let it ruin your whole day, right? or you can accept it and just let it roll off your back. So,
well, thank you so much, Sharon. So we are fundraising for our next Music Heals class for children who are suffering loss and grief to find hope and inspiration through learning how to write and record their own story into a song. And we hope that if you find what we are doing is helpful to you, then you will help us turn grief into positive action. A donation of any amount will help make a huge impact on a child's life and empower them to grieve, grow, and heal. Thank you very much for considering this opportunity to make a difference with us. And please spread the word. The more donations and support we have, then the more children we can help.
And my disclaimer, we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people, like John Legend says, that are experiencing
Speak for yourself.
Loss and have experienced death. And we're just sharing our story to try to help you overcome it.
If you are here in Los Angeles and are interested in learning more about our guest Sharon's work in grief Reiki, did I say that right?
yes, you did.
Or in the grief recovery method, please go to Sharon's website. It's www.grief, then
Dash. Is that hyphen?
Hyphen dash.
Hyphen.
Dash. Okay, I'll say it again. www.grief-reiki
REIKI.com
or call her at 1-800-458-7348.
And to all of our listeners, we will be here next Wednesday.
You guys won't be here
won't.
next Wednesday. Henry will be here next Wednesday.
The Foundation of Podcasts will be here next Wednesday. But please make sure you tune in, you listen, you ask questions, you participate. I will be tuning in as well. You can visit us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And if you're listening to the recording of our show and want to share your questions, like I said, make sure you reach out to us on social media.
Taj Jackson, social media.
Twitter at DDJ Foundation. Facebook, DEE Jackson Foundation. Instagram at DEE Jackson Foundation. And the website is www.ddjf.org.
Great, thank you.
That's pretty much it. And Sharon, we look forward to your book. I hope it's going along well.
It is.
And
Thank you.
on behalf of all of us, we are so thankful to have you. And you're awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
Sharon.
having me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for listening to The Power of Love. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Support for our Power of Love radio show comes from a variety of generous donors, including supporters from institutions, individuals, and corporations through the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. DDJF is a nonprofit 501c3 organization.
Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Power of Love radio show, only on LA Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Power of Love radio show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We're here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. We believe that through the power of love, that nothing is impossible when with love on your side. I'm Henry Hebert, and today I am flying solo in the hosting chair because Taj, Terrell, and TJ Jackson are in Amsterdam for their 3T concert. And I hope y'all are having a great time, and hopefully I'll do okay here. So we are live, and so if you're listening to us right now, thank you for joining us. This is show number 6. Today we will be looking at how loss and grief can be the gift of adversity. And later on, we will be opening up to take a few questions via Twitter. So if you have a question about our topic, which is loss and grief, and you want to ask us, then send us a tweet at DDJ Foundation. And we are not licensed therapists. We are just people who have experienced death and loss in our lives and have been impacted by it. And today we have a very, 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 very special guest, Julie Glassman. She is someone that is near and dear to our hearts because she has been with us from the start with the foundation. And she is an amazing, amazing marketing consultant and amazing brand consultant that actually helped us with the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. And I'm getting a little teary-eyed. And I've known Julie for many, many years. And she's this incredible writer, lifestyle blogger of Fabulous Delicious. And she has recently filed for divorce from her husband of 16 years. And she's currently raising 2 young children as a single mom in Los Angeles. And after a year filled with unexpected change and strife, the always positive Julie, for the first time, found herself lost in a sea of despair. Faced with every major life challenge imaginable all at once, divorce, financial strife, single parenting, illness, losing her home, depression, isolation, her once magical life suddenly seemed unbearable. That was until she discovered the gift of adversity, the powerful life lessons hidden in pain and discord, the opportunity for unprecedented growth and change that comes only from utter destruction. The strength derived from welcoming and honoring pain, fear, and doubt, the courage to walk away from what is no longer working, the peace that comes from the journey within of self-acceptance, self-care, and self-love, the joy of allowing yourself to be human, flawed, fallible, and still be loved. And today we will learn how the gifts of adversity, of pain, of loss, of grief, of shame became a true transformational gift for Julie. Welcome, Julie. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Henry. You're sad. I don't like to see you tearing up.
I got emotional. We've known each other for how long?
A very long time.
For a very, very long time.
10 years, 9 years, almost a decade.
And I think just connecting with your story right now, I have so much love in my heart for you, that realizing how much you've overcome, and I'm happy that you're here sharing it with me, or will be sharing it with us. But I definitely am having like a moment of teary-eyed, because I don't like thinking about a dear friend of mine being hurt, but yet there is that other side of what you've grown and learned and your transformation. So, let's start. Who knew having friends on would be a little bit more challenging? I didn't think it was going to be me crying at first.
Right? And I probably won't be, but we need some tissues in here for sure, just in case.
All right, so where do we start? How about we start with loss of health? For 2 years, you had been having your womanly time more frequently.
Wow, we're starting with that. The opener. Let's just get right in there, Henry.
You had an increase in energy and you were losing weight. So 2 out of those 3 things on the surface doesn't sound
no,
so bad.
That's good. That's all a blessing. My womanly time, not so much.
But then in November 2015, you went to the doctor, and what happened?
She told me I had a fatty neck, which is ironic considering everything else was sort of quite thin at the time. She just noticed some excess weight and tissue in my neck, which I listened to and then ignored, which I think we all do. I thought, okay, so I have a big neck.
Did you tell her that you were also having your period every 2 weeks?
I did tell her that, and she ran some blood tests and everything appeared normal, which is a huge lesson for people moving forward with their own health issues, where you can't always depend on what test results say. You have to go with what's in your gut.
What was your gut saying to you?
Well, at the time, my gut was saying, ignore it. You've got lots of energy, and you're kind of, doing fine. But I knew something was wrong.
Did you tell your doctor also about the increase in energy?
I did, yeah. There was definitely something going on. I wanted to get to the bottom of it. But again, I sort of, given that there were things happening in my personal life that were above and beyond health issues, I did sit on it for a while.
And in terms of increase in energy, I think you had mentioned how you were running 12 miles a day and just...
Yeah, a really excessive amount of energy that was inexplicable. And I think that now that I know what was happening, it makes sense. But at the time, it just seemed like a frenetic energy that had possessed me.
And in terms of your blood results that came back, your thyroid was okay?
Everything appeared to be normal in terms of my hormones and my thyroid. There were small sort of questionable items, but nothing that would lead you to believe that anything was really going wrong.
And your doctor wasn't worried about the weight loss?
No.
How much did you weigh at the time?
Wow, on the radio, Henry? I weighed, I think at my thinnest, I was about 107 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. It was small. I miss those days.
You look amazing. You look amazing, girl. Okay, so, you were scared.
I was just maybe paralyzed. I don't know if I was scared, because at the same time I was also dealing with my marriage falling apart. And I think that sometimes stress can be not only something that plays into your overall health, but it can be something that disguises poor health. So in other words, it can lead to problems, but it can also just be something that's so much of a distraction that you're not focused on anything else. So I was sort of buried in stress as opposed to health issues and kind of ignoring what my doctor was telling me.
So you went home. Did you tell anybody about that conversation with your doctor?
Nope.
And she had recommended to you to
have an ultrasound, on my neck, which was something I thought you only did for babies, but apparently not.
So did you make the appointment for the ultrasound?
Nope.
And so then you mentioned you were having stress in terms of your marriage. What was going on?
I think that there was a realization that perhaps I was not in a relationship that was suited for me. In other words, I think it's really easy when you have children and when you've been with someone for a long time to become complacent and to just sort of accept things at face value and to sort of be in your suffering or sadness as part and parcel of what happens in long-term relationships, that things ebb and flow and that there are moments full of passion and then there are moments where there are lulls and you sort of just stay in that complacency. And while I did that for many years, primarily for the sake of my children and keeping the nucleus of my family firmly intact, inside I knew that I wasn't in the right relationship and that I needed to resolve that in some way when I was ready. And I think one of the things that happens sort of magically or through the powers of the universe or whatever you believe is that you're given a gift of the right moment, whether you want it or not. So when you have things in the back of your mind that are plaguing you or causing you stress, at some point they come to a head, whether you want them to or not. You can't bury emotion forever. So I was sort of grappling with things bubbling up and coming to the surface that I had denied or tried to cover up or compartmentalize before.
And what was the stressor that bubbled up?
I mean, I think marriages all have their own sort of issues and nuances. Ours were not unique. Money stresses and child rearing, and but for me, it was the feeling of I am not with the right person. I am with someone whom I love and adore, who is one of my dearest friends, but this is not the right person intrinsically. And I wanted to deny that for as long as I could. And at some point I realized, unbeknownst to me, that I had sort of reached the end of my rope and that I was going to honor what I knew was right for me and the life that I wanted to be living. However selfish I believed that to be at the time.
And you had been married for 16 years with 2 children.
Yep.
So you really had built a life together.
Yes, a full and intact life together. And I think that when you have children, you stop living exclusively for self. And in many ways, most parents stop living, or most mothers stop living for self at all. It becomes about the children. And you have to redefine yourself and you sort of lose yourself in that role. And when you refocus your attention on yourself, sometimes you find yourself drifting and sort of, nowhere.
How scared were you to actually acknowledge these feelings of unhappiness and realizing this may not be the right place for me?
It took me maybe 7 years to acknowledge those feelings and to stop the constant cycle of trying and, cajoling and adjusting. And
were you trying with your husband?
Yeah.
What were you doing?
Communicating. Maybe not in the most effective ways, but communicating, trying to make my feelings and needs known. But I think that some feelings transcend resolution, meaning that there are just some truths that are undeniable, and no matter what you do to try to fix them, it doesn't change anything. And we all have this gift of this inner voice that exists within us, and we all tend to ignore that voice. and to not give it the sort of credit or respect that it deserves. And so I think for a long time I ignored that voice until the voice took over and became my voice. And suddenly everything changed.
You could no longer deny the feelings that you were having that were coming up.
It just surfaced, and it felt like my entire life was exploding. And then at that time, my health issues were revealed, and so it was a perfect storm.
And I think you mentioned to me about, in terms of a marriage, where when you get married, you're these two people, but you have to nurture the marriage.
Yeah, my husband has this philosophy, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, which is that there are three quote-unquote people or entities in a marriage, which is each person who's part of the relationship, and then the marriage itself. And each person brings to that marriage their individual needs and wants, demands, likes, dislikes. And then the marriage itself has its own set of requirements and needs. And if that isn't nurtured, independent of sort of the ego of the individuals or the needs of the individuals, nurtured as its own being and its own entity, it can be really destructive and it can die.
Was the marriage being nurtured?
No. I think that our individual needs and egos were being brought to the table while the marriage was sort of languishing.
And what happened in terms of, I think you mentioned that that in the course of getting married and setting up your life and having a family, that both of you became really focused on, in terms of careers, making sure you could provide so you can have everything you need for the children. Mm-hmm. And did you feel at one point, though, it was so much about the have to work, have to provide?
Yeah, I think you and I had a conversation about this at lunch the other day, that I have a philosophy about unspoken agreements that exist in all relationships. So you have friendships that are based on unspoken agreements. Like I play the role of the social chair and you play the role, I'm not talking about us specifically, even though I'm happy to make plans for us. But I play one role and you play another. And it creates this sort of beautiful, sometimes dynamic, or unhealthy, sometimes dynamic, between people who come together in any sort of relationship, be it work, be it friendship or romance. And when those unspoken agreements change and one person grows or outgrows whatever they agreed to subconsciously, if the other person can't keep up and sort of honor that growth and understand that things are changing and that new agreements need to be reached, it can destroy relationships. And our agreement was very much about who we were when we came together in our 20s. And then when we found ourselves in our 40s, even though I'm not really in my 40s, I'm just pretending I'm in my 40s, really super young.
Me too.
Yeah. So when we found ourselves in our 40s with 2 children and a million changes, our agreements were different. I was no longer willing to be the person that I came into the marriage
So you
as.
essentially were operating as a 20-year-old with an agreement from a 20-year-old relationship, which now you're in your 40s, but really not.
Really early 40s.
Really early.
Yeah.
And so now it's like the growth of a relationship, having to evolve from meeting in your 20s to now we're in our 40s and having an adult relationship.
And honoring his growth and honoring my growth and redefining. And I think if you don't check in and redefine, maybe annually, we have mutual friends who, sorry, I'm calling you out, Julie Swissler, who's not even listening, but should be.
But maybe now she will be.
Yeah, she should be. But she and her husband do a lot of planning at the beginning of each year, where they sit down together and they do vision boards and they create their sort of game plan for the year and think about the directions.
Sounds like it's their emotional and mental game plan.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's not only about the things they want to achieve, let's say monetarily or in terms of life goals, but also how they're going to go about manifesting it, bringing it into their lives. And it's a mutual focus on the things that matter most to them. And to me, that type of relationship is just super healthy. The idea that you work together to change things, to grow, to become different than you were the year before. And I think when you allow yourselves to just base everything on old rules of engagement, and then things start to change around you, and you don't learn how to retrain your thinking, or to how to look at a person differently, or how to sort of change your stroke to swim in a different direction.
Can you feel stuck?
Yeah, you just sort of feel like my life is moving in this way, and yet I'm stuck here in old ways of being. And it's and I think that as mothers and as
do you think that feels suffocating? Or can
yes.
it feel?
Oh, I mean, absolutely suffocating, particularly when, as a mom, you don't want to destroy your family. So you literally feel, I want to say that word differently, you literally, I love it when people say it like that, feel as if you have to stay, because once you agree to have children, your life should be, as society tells us, in service of those children and their needs. And you sort of mislead yourself or dupe yourself into believing that staying is better for the children. And I think that what I've learned is that being courageous and having the courage to leave and to decide that I was going to live a more authentic life and be true to myself is actually the greatest gift that I can give to my children, albeit painful. And I think that pain is also a gift you can give to your children, because when they just sort of sail through life and everything's good, and you live in the Pacific Palisades and everything's beautiful and sunny, life has a way of biting you in the, can I say?
And where the sun doesn't
shine. Can I say, yeah. in the A blank blank, and making you, and sort of setting you up for failure. And there's something about watching how resilient my children are and how they have sort of traversed and transcended
teaching them
adversity.
How to move through loss and grief at this age is skills that can really benefit them when they're adults.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it may be painful to see, but yet it is like a huge gift, because
it is.
At some point we all go through, loss and grief.
Mm-hmm. I remember my son, when we first told him we were separating, collapsed, and he fell on the floor and he was bawling, and he said, "I will never be happy again." And as a parent, all you want to do is take that away. You want to say, you know what, we're not separating. Just kidding, And now I can say to him, think about how you felt a year ago, and show him that not only is he strong and resilient and powerful and can handle anything, but teach him how time really does heal, as long as you go through the process of releasing grief, dealing with feelings, talking it through, accepting where you are. It is amazing to look back and think that you can't even connect with old pain because you've done the work to move ahead
forward
and away from it.
You also mentioned when we were at that lunch about realizing that you were in a transactional marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, again, this goes back to the whole notion of unspoken agreements, but I think that our marriage became largely transactional. And what I mean by that is it was about the children, their activities, bills, mortgage, car payments, scheduling. Everything became about the life around us and the way in which it affected us, as opposed to the sort of internal journey that we were on together. It was all about sort of the extenuating circumstances of our lives, as opposed to holding on to that deep sort of boyfriend-girlfriend connection that you work so hard to create and nurture when you first meet someone. We were like business partners.
It's almost like checklist living.
Yeah.
We have the 2 cars.
Yeah.
Check. We have the house.
Yep.
Check. We have the marriage. Check. We have the kids. Check.
Yep.
Kids have to go to school. Check.
The dentist and
it's
and
like
the
a list.
And the meetings with their teachers and all of these things that marriages become about, if you don't remember that it's sort of the third entity that needs to be nurtured.
It's interesting, and you did mention, like, when you first started dating, it was about feelings and romance, emotion, But then why then when you get into a marriage, and maybe this is part of society, we've conditioned ourselves in society that once you're married, it then becomes about this transactional way of living as opposed to still connecting with the romance, connecting with the emotions, nurturing that love, which is what brought you together.
Right. I mean, that's sort of the great mystery, I think, of relationships. And I think it's actually quite rare, sadly, to find couples who are able to maintain that level of intimacy. And I think that, it's work, and it's equal work on both sides of the relationship. And it also is pulling away from the day-to-day life in order to nurture that relationship, which we had absolutely stopped doing.
So you mentioned when you told your children how Zach collapsed. How did you feel after that, and I think you mentioned at that lunch you went out for a run. Can you just describe what happened?
Yeah, I think that I had always lived my life in, even though I had this sort of thing nagging at me, like I don't think this marriage is right for me, I don't think I'm in the right relationship, I was able to ignore that and compartmentalize. And
So you had those thoughts running in your head for about 7 years?
Yeah, for a long time. But I was able to sort of put it away in a neat, tidy box, or a series of neat, tidy boxes, and file them away. And
because on Facebook, I have to say, your life looked amazing.
Yeah, my life is really good in social media. It is like
the
amazing.
Perfect, amazing life in social media.
Yeah, it's all BS, isn't it? I mean, so the reality is that. But when you compartmentalize, you're able to hide things from yourself. It's sort of interesting. And I was masterful at hiding things from myself, and also managing my own PR, sort of putting on a pretty face and making sure that everybody saw me in a certain way. And it's funny how none of that matters to me anymore, but it did. And so after...
You got a little emotional there.
I did.
What were you thinking
get
about?
emotional. I just thought how wonderful it feels to sort of let go, to surrender, and to understand that you don't really have to hold it all together, that you can actually fall apart and be a mess, and that mess is okay. And
it's okay to be not perfect?
It's okay not to be perfect. And it is exhausting to try to be perfect. And such a waste of precious energy and time. And I think for me, it took sort of the utter destruction of my entire existence for me to wake up and see that that I'm just sort of okay, independent of all the trappings of a perfect life. So in that, what I'm calling utter destruction, I had a moment where my children were just at the depths of despair. It was Christmas time, which is our family's favorite holiday, and filled with traditions and things that we love to do together that suddenly weren't happening. And my children were feeling just the strain and the pain and the energy that was so pervasive in our household. And we were supposed to go to this annual event that we go to every year, Candy Cane Lane in El Segundo, which we love, which is a great place. Yes, it's wonderful. And meeting a group of friends there, and this wonderful annual tradition. And my husband decided he wasn't going to join us. And my son was falling to pieces, and my daughter was acting out with a lot of anger. And I decided to go on a run because of my excess energy that I still hadn't resolved at the time. And I just ran, and I ran, and I ran until I couldn't run anymore. And on the way home, I saw a bus coming toward me, and I thought it would be so much easier just to hurl myself in front of that bus. And I had never in my life had a thought like that, because I have always sort of fallen up and never viewed my life in any way except for this sort of, compartmentalized, PR-driven person that I created. And realizing that I had reached that place was a huge moment for me, where I literally felt like I wanted to crawl out of my skin, like I didn't want to be in my body anymore. And that's a terrifying place to be, but it also makes you deeply compassionate about people who are experiencing deep depression or loss or grief, where, that empathy may not have existed before.
Were you able to then understand suicide in a way that...
Yeah, because sometimes it feels like there's no other choice. Like it's just too hard.
Too painful?
Too painful to exist.
So then, and I think you had mentioned that like you felt like your life was just really slipping away and you didn't know how to be happy or even identify with you anymore. And that also none of your defenses were working and you were just like, how do I redefine? And then you mentioned you came home and you were panting and you looked into the mirror, and what did you see in the mirror?
So I guess like cardiovascularly, if that's a word, everything was sort of like pumping in my body, and I looked in the mirror and I saw this giant ball in my neck, and I had no idea what it was. And I called a dear friend and I said, I have this ball in my neck, and I made the mistake of going on the internet. And the internet, like you can diagnose yourself with anything, literally diagnose yourself with anything. So I diagnosed myself with throat cancer, and I was panicked and freaked out, and I called my doctor and she forced an ultrasound. And I did not have throat cancer, fortunately, but I did have, at the time we thought it was just 2, but I had 2 massive tumors in my throat. And one of them was wrapped around my windpipe, and they were both coming from my thyroid, even though my thyroid numbers were normal. And then I went through a series of fun things like needle biopsies in my neck and all sorts of great stuff, for which I had amazing friends with me and around me. But in experiencing this at the same time as my marriage breaking up was just a huge challenge, because you no longer have your person, so to speak, and you are dependent upon your village, for which I'm very fortunate to have a beautiful village around me of friends. But there was this feeling of, oh my God, I am totally alone. And this is the reality of my new life.
And at this point, had your husband moved out, so you were living alone with the kids?
I was living alone and thinking that I had cancer, and the stresses of life in general were just so overwhelming at the time that I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And I forgot to mention this too. My son also was diagnosed at the time with a lung disease that's part and parcel of his asthma, and I just thought, how can this be happening? Like I crashed my car. I had all of these things that were sort of happening all at once. And I think that is the greatest gift of the universe, as I call it. And I use that, in a way that other people may say God. But for me, it really is about like, you are given as much as you need until you wake up and figure it out. And so I kept thinking,
the universe was piling
it on as much as possible
to get you to wake up, to really see, to acknowledge what was happening, not only within your heart for feelings, but also within your body.
Yes. I had a friend say to me, I have a girlfriend who has a degenerative eye disease. And she is essentially losing her sight in one eye and perhaps the other. And she said to me that a friend once said to her, "What are you not seeing?" And I thought, I just got chills saying that. But she said to me, "What are you not saying?" And because of what was happening in my throat and this tumor around my windpipe. And what I realized is I was saying everything. What I wasn't doing was shutting up. And
what do you mean?
Well, the tumor, so when I finally had everything removed, they took out my thyroid and the tumors, and it turns out that I had 3 tumors and Hashimoto disease, which is an autoimmune disorder that had sort of ravaged my thyroid. And when you have your thyroid out, everything goes haywire in terms of your emotions and your strength and your energy and your moods and everything else. So it's kind of a perfect storm at the moment in my life. And I couldn't speak as much as I used to because I I'm kind of a big talker. You probably know. And I kind of have...
Trying to get a word in here.
Yeah, you're like, can you be quiet? We're on the radio. Be quiet. So I couldn't yell anymore, and I couldn't raise my voice. And I got really quiet. And in that quiet came all of the answers. Because when we just stop to listen to what's going on in our hearts and minds, or listen to the lessons that the universe is providing us, there is so much to be learned. And when we are so busy talking and filling the noise, and filling the void with noise and distracting ourselves, we miss the point. We miss the journey.
And so in that silence, what was really coming up was the emotions, and you were actually feeling all the emotions that you were pushing down.
Correct.
And now at this point, you're a single mom.
Although I do want to add that my husband took wonderful care of me the entire time. So I was very fortunate.
Did you have a moment where you feel like maybe we should get back together because you were
about
ill?
a million moments. Not just being sick, but just like, God, this is what life is all about, is this.
Like when you're sick?
Yeah. In
having
those
a
moments
partner.
of need, and having that support and that unconditional love. But that little voice inside of me wasn't going away. So, yeah.
And so you had the surgery. Actually, though, before the surgery, you got an email from your landlord the morning of the surgery. What happened?
Yeah. So the morning of my surgery, another gift arrived in my inbox.
Gift of adversity.
Yes, beautiful gift
got
of
mail.
adversity. I got, and that mail said that I needed to move out of my house in 45 days. And although this surgery is actually quite easy to recover from, I wasn't going to be able to lift things, and just the fact that I had to pack up my home and move my children, who were already so overwhelmed by all of the change.
By divorce, by loss of health.
Yeah, suddenly we were losing our home as well. And moving is really expensive, and we had not worked out the particulars of our finances, and in my sort of unhealthy space, I wasn't working as much because I run my own consulting business. I just wasn't focused. And so money was very, very tight, which was another thing my children had never experienced, fortunately, or unfortunately. They had lived a very comfortable life. And so suddenly we couldn't afford things. We were losing our home. Mommy was sick, and Daddy wasn't there. I mean, physically
like
in our home.
For you to say to the kids, Mommy can't afford that.
I think that's something that I perhaps didn't handle as well as I could have, because I think that that's scary for children to hear. And I think also that when your life is falling apart, it is really hard to be present and the kind of parent that you want to be. And there's something about learning to forgive yourself in your deepest, darkest human moments, when you fail those around you, to still love, nurture, and respect yourself, because I was not a great mom during this time. However, I think I'm a great mom. And so there's a distinction. And having the ability to say to myself, it's okay if you drop the ball right now, and giving myself permission to do that.
What was happening in terms of with the kids, and how you were handling the stress?
I was yelling a lot before the surgery, which is another gift of the surgery. I was yelling a lot. I was allowing my experience to dictate theirs. But I have to share this with you,
Were
Henry.
you allowing the stress to take over?
Yeah, the stress took over. Because you can't think straight when you're focused on everything that's going wrong. But I wanted to say this because it's so good. A friend of mine a few days ago, who's had a lot of her own adversity, said to me, I said, how do you not take it out on the kids when your life is kind of falling apart around you? Because I noticed how sort of, how unbelievably close she is to her children.
And she's a single mom as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And her story is deeply challenging. And she said to me, well, my kids are my tribe. They're my people. And when, and I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect of, when things get hard, I just bring them closer. I hold them and I cry in front of them and we cry together and we love one another. And she kept saying, they're my peeps, they're my tribe. And I look at my children, or up until this point, as sort of my children. They're my job. They're my job. That's the perfect way of putting it, even though I do that job with tremendous love most of the time.
Sometimes the job can feel like a burden.
Yeah, where it was just like, oh my God, I have to feed the kids. Oh my God, I have to pick them up. I have to do this. I have to go here. I have to take care of this and homework and basketball and voice lessons and everything else that children do. And the moment she said that to me, my relationship to, with, and for my children was transformed, which is to say that now when I feel stressed, I want to bring them closer as opposed to viewing them as sort of something to be dealt with. So when I am sad or feeling down, all I want to do is sort of be with my tribe. And it's a beautiful change in perspective.
Did you also notice then when you felt the stress, instead of wanting to yell now, you actually took a moment to pause, to breathe,
yes,
to then kind of workshop with them, like, this is what's happening.
Yes.
And you work together as a team.
In fact, we tried a new
emotions.
exercise recently that's become sort of now a mainstay for us, which is children have a hard time expressing emotion in full sentences. When you ask them what's going on, they don't necessarily have the language to be able to describe what's going on. And so we started using words as opposed to sentences to traverse challenging situations. So just give me the words that you're feeling right now. And the words come out as sad and angry and mad. And the more words they express, the more they get to the meat of the problem. And once it's out there, it sort of disappears. And so we now use words as a way to sort of heal and express, as opposed to complete sentences and long discussions.
So through this adversity, what's amazing is you've created a stronger bond with your children now, and really opened up their communication abilities and skills on a whole new level, which is pretty tremendous to be able to give them that tool now at such a young age, for them to then be able to handle loss and grief later on.
Right.
So, wow. So I know you've mentioned a few times that it is really scary to break up a marriage and a family. Can you just kind of talk a little bit more about that? And you mentioned you felt selfish.
Yeah, and I think that that's something I still grapple with. But there's something about divorce that it's so mainstream that some people minimize it, because it just seems like it's a universal experience at this point. And other people are mad at you about it because they feel as if you've changed their lives as your friends.
Can you give some examples?
I think that people feel like they have to choose sides, or they question, when you are the person who initiates the breakup, they question whether or not you know what you're doing, whether or not it's worthwhile, if you can save it. They say all the things that they probably should be saying. Are you sure? And do you think you should go into therapy? And do you think that you should be working on it? Things that I think good friends should say. But there are also the comments where people imply that you shouldn't be in pain because you created this situation. So sometimes I had moments where I felt like I wasn't allowed to complain. I wasn't allowed to feel sad. I wasn't allowed to acknowledge the pain that I was in because I initiated it. So if you made your bed, you need to lie in it. And
so
I think
as the one who initiates the divorce and leaving the marriage, you're essentially the leaver of the marriage.
Yeah.
So the leaver essentially deserves no empathy because they're the ones who are deciding to walk away from the marriage.
Correct.
So you felt like, here you are. I mean, it's a loss for you, 16 years of a relationship. You know, you're grieving the marriage, yet all of a sudden you're not receiving empathy.
Apparently self-created grief is not something that you're entitled to. And I think people lose the point that it takes two, and that I didn't just fail my marriage failed me, and that there are two sides to every story. And so while I bear a lot of the responsibility for the demise of the marriage, I don't bear all of it.
Do you feel like there was a lot of judgment for the one leaving the marriage?
Yes, a lot of judgment, including from my family, where I really felt like everyone sort of felt like, come on, your marriage was fine. And for all intents and purposes, it was.
For social media life, it was perfect.
It was perfect on Facebook, the perfect Facebook marriage. But I think that that is sort of where you have to dig down and find the courage to honor yourself. Your truth is all that matters. Everyone else's version of your truth is completely irrelevant.
So what were some of the intellectual comments that you would hear when you shared how you were feeling with family and friends?
Most of it was, well, you did this, so you got to deal with it. Don't complain. This is your fault, or you can always go back. Things like that.
So I think you mentioned that there was a moment that you felt really depressed and you were in bed and just in despair, not knowing if you were going to be able to get up or not, and you felt really alone. And you had experienced some of these comments like, well, now you made your bed, and you were quite literally in your bed.
Yeah. And it probably wasn't made.
And you said something that was so amazing though, because now you weren't so much talking at people. You had this moment of going within. And once you kind of cleared away all the fog and addressed the fear, because you felt there's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. What's going to happen with my life now?
Yep.
I don't know health-wise. Oh my God, what's going to happen with money? How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to feed the children? How am I going to live now? How is this going to happen? And you literally collapsed in bed, and all these feelings are coming up, and they're intense because you bottled them up for years, quite literally, until your neck was literally exploding with tumors, telling you have to speak. You have to speak your truth, your real truth, not your Facebook truth, girl.
Yeah.
And you said all of a sudden it got quiet, and you felt like you were alone, and that you didn't have that, like anyone that could kind of give you that strength.
Rescue you.
Yeah. Or even like you used to have someone you'd call for 16 years.
Yeah.
So now it's you.
Yeah.
And people couldn't quite understand what you were going through because they view you as the leaver of the marriage. And you had this moment of going within quiet and finding forgiveness. But within that forgiveness for yourself, you found this great strength. And you said that you put your hand in your other hand. And will you share that? Because I think that's beautiful.
So I call it, I have little names for everything apparently, and I never knew it, but I call it putting down your weapons. And what I mean by that is that when we are in fear and when we are in grief and when we are feeling sad, we tend to run away from those feelings. It's the fear of the fear. And we fend them off with every weapon and defense mechanism we can create and come up with and muster. And when you put down those weapons and you just let the fear come in and you just welcome the sadness and you just let it sort of take over, it's gone so much faster than if you try to fight it off. Because in the fight comes sort of the prolonging of the pain, and in the surrender comes the resolution. And so for me, I had this moment where I just let it all in, this feeling of complete and utter loneliness and despair. And in that moment, I felt my spirit and my soul sort of well up within me, both sort of physiologically and emotionally, where I could feel the energy of self. And I grabbed my hand and I said, I have you. I have you.
You were holding your own hand.
Grabbing my own hand. And I realized in that moment that that's what it's all about. That as much as our relationships matter and our and the lives we build around us matter, unless we have that love and support for ourselves and that compassion to love ourselves, even when we are as ugly and messy and lost and screwed up as we can possibly be, when we find that peace within to just say, I have you. I'm right here, no matter what.
You really learned to hold your own hand and found self-love and self-care.
But not in the absence of self-truth or reality. I see myself for exactly the flawed, fallible person I am. However, I love that girl. I really do.
And I think what's also interesting, you talked about how in learning all this, you also learned that I don't need to push my people, which is your kids. You don't need to push them away with stress.
No, I bring them in.
You bring them in. You learn to start communicating with them because they are your tribe. You hold them tighter now. And I think when we move away from negative emotions, we're trying to protect our children. But then the stress of actually pushing the emotions down is affecting them in a negative way.
And they see everything energetically. They see through their little connected eyes. You know, someone once said, and I don't know who I'm quoting, that children have 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot on earth. And I think that they have the ability to see the things that over time we start to ignore because we get distracted with all of the things that life puts in our heads and that we experience. And I think that kids just read your energy. And the more calm and quiet you go, the more calm and quiet they go. The more crazy you get, the crazier they get. And so, but viewing them as my people or my tribe, as my beautiful friend put it the other day, really allows me to see them as sort of allies and these little amazing entities that I'm on this journey with, not sort of managing along the way.
So in terms of the gift of adversity, can you share with us about that and explain?
I think really that there's no greater teacher in life than adversity, pain, experience that is not necessarily desired. I say to my kids all the time, if it were Christmas every day, it wouldn't be Christmas anymore. And to me, it is understanding that when you take the time to look at all of the chaos and madness that's swirling around you and view it as a teacher and take those lessons to heart, that you are suddenly gifted with the understanding that it's all going to be okay. And that as long as you have yourself, you have your strength, you believe in yourself, you forgive yourself, and you treat yourself with kindness, that you can and will survive anything.
And you are now a warrior?
I am. Can't you see? I wore like my superhero cape
and
today.
You have. I mean, in less than a year, it's like you've gone through all this adversity, and I'm seeing you, and you're rebuilding your life still. And now you're in this place of passion, peace, joy, meditating, reflection, and you're just in this like gorgeous, beautiful relationship with yourself. And it definitely was not easy getting here, and it's still not easy. But in terms of the tools and skills, it's becoming easier because you have these tools to move through these difficult emotions, and you have a new inner strength that just is just transcending everything now. And I just see it in you. It's just so beautiful.
Thank you.
What would you, if somebody's going through this right now, similar or can relate to you, what would be the one thing that you'd say to them?
I would say put down your weapons. Stop fighting it. Allow yourself to feel everything, because it is not as scary as you think. And feeling emotion, dealing with emotion, expressing emotion is so soothing and healing. And if you have the courage to face what's going on inside of you, you will get to the other side of it. If you keep running away from it, you'll never stop running.
And I'm going to take one question from social media because we have to go soon. Miracle Baby 1 asks, will I ever recover from losing my friend and be happy again?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I think that friends come into our lives at different stages, and there are friends that are there to teach us different lessons at different times in our lives. I read once that people come into your life for 2 reasons, as a blessing or a lesson. And if you are willing to view adversity and pain as a lesson and see the situation that existed between the two of you clearly, and with a lot of sort of egoless thought where you acknowledge your role in things and can learn from it, your next friendship and the friendships that follow will be better, healthier, and more beautiful. So this person was perhaps both a blessing and a lesson. And yes, you're going to be fine.
Going to be okay. Thank you so much, Julie. We hope if you find what we're doing is helpful to you, then you'll help us turn grief into positive action by donating to our foundation, the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. A donation of any amount will make a huge impact on a child's life and empower them to grieve, grow, and heal. Thank you so much for considering this opportunity to make a difference with us. Please spread the word. And thank you, Julie, for sharing your story of grief and loss and how you found hope and inspiration through the power of love. And we are not licensed therapists. We're people who experience death and loss in our lives and are impacted by it. And if you're wondering how to make incredible decorations for the holidays, look for a meal that will impress but is on a budget, or maybe looking for style finds that aren't going to break the wallet, then check out Julie's Fabulous Delicious on Facebook and Instagram. And the handle on Instagram is @FabDelish, DELISH. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. And to all our viewers, we are here again next Wednesday from 1 to 2. And the guys will be back next week. Yay! And if you have any questions that you want answered, please send them to social media. Visit our page. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for listening to The Power of Love. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Support for our Power of Love radio show comes from a variety of generous donors, including supporters from institutions, individuals, and corporations through the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. DDJF is a nonprofit 501c3 organization.
Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Power of Love radio show, only on LA Talk Radio.
Welcome to Power of Love radio show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. We believe that through the power of love, that nothing is impossible with love on your side. I am TJ Jackson, and I'm here with my brothers Taj and Terrell and our wonderful, wonderful friend, Miss Henry Hebert.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, everyone.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Henry, I have to say something. We missed you.
I missed all of you last week.
We missed you.
I missed you.
Glad to be back here.
So we are live, and if you're listening to us right now, thank you for joining us. This is show number 7.
Yes.
I got it right. Later on, we will be opening up to take a few questions via Twitter. So if you have a question about our topic, which is loss and grief, and you want to ask, then send us a tweet at DDJ Foundation. Taj is on our computer right now, ready to take those questions later on.
Oh, yeah.
And we are not licensed therapists.
Nope.
So we are just people who have experienced loss and grieving. And we're just sharing our stories and what we've learned over the many years of dealing with it to the masses. So if you think you need professional help, please go and seek it.
And our guest this week is Dr. Jeanette Raymond, and she's a psychologist and psychotherapist with a private practice in Los Angeles, California. She was born in Calcutta, India, and she was educated in Great Britain. She got a Master's of Education degree before beginning her career as a child and educational psychologist. After settling in America, Dr. Raymond obtained her PhD in clinical psychology and switched her focus to helping adults establish more secure relationships. She specializes in conflicts and fears that prevent healthy intimacy, thrive in all types of relationships. She's an expert in understanding emotions, which I totally need, to help people have more stable and satisfying relationships. And she writes regularly about obstacles, how they can get in the way to developing intimacy problems. And she's also the author of Now You Want Me, Now You Don't. Is Dr. Jeanette on the line?
We're going to try to reach her.
Okay.
Interesting.
Think it's
Let's
interesting?
Ring, ring. She was in a session, right?
Hello, Dr. Jeanette?
Yes.
Hello, this is Henry, and I'm here.
Hello.
Hello, I'm here with Tosh, Cheryl, and TJ.
And you're live right now, so we're giving you that little warning that we're on right now.
How are you?
I can barely hear you.
Uh-oh.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yeah, that's much better.
Is that much better?
I like her accent.
Yeah, that's now.
I like her accent, too. So, hello, Dr. Jeanette. You are on air, and we are ready to go.
Great. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. So, as you know, we focus on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. And a few examples of loss can be losing a loved one, losing a beloved pet, loss of relationship, loss of income, or even loss of faith or loss of trust. But regardless of what types of loss, the emotional suffering from grief can be extremely painful. And on your website, you talk about how you believe that our emotional wounds are so painful that we often engage in self-defeating and self-destructive acts to get relief. So can our emotional wounds that we have suffered in the past from loss be unexpressed grief that is now affecting our present day and won't even realize it?
Oh, absolutely. You know, when we're little, we don't have a lot of tools to express ourselves. You know, we might cry or try to get someone's attention, but a lot of the time the people around us have no idea of what's going on inside us, and they might brush it off and say, oh, it's just this, don't worry about it, or whatever, it's no big deal. And they dismiss our very intense feelings that are real and are relevant to the time. They're not over the top, but to other people they might look like that, and they dismiss it. So we kind of model ourselves on them, and we dismiss it too. The only problem is we don't get rid of it completely. It stays with us. And when we're very little, we only have one place to put it, and that's in our bodies, because that's all we know. We have a body, you know. We don't know about minds and other things, so we stuff it in our body. And it literally gets into the DNA of your cells. So when you get older and you have language and you have experience, and something triggers you, you have another loss, you know, it could be a small loss, like, you know, somebody threw away a treasured toy that you had, or an object, you know, without thinking, or they broke it, and you feel that loss coming up again because there's nothing you can do, you feel out of control. It triggers the old wounds and the old losses. So we have a triple, quadruple, whatever kind of whammy. And if you think about it as a wave, you know, that just doesn't stop, it becomes intense. And we sometimes think, gosh, you know, did I overreact? That's only so-and-so, so what, you know. But it isn't just that. It's all the unprocessed, real wounds that were never acknowledged. That's number one. You have to acknowledge that it actually happened and it's real, and were attended to, were processed, were kind of digested, and then you live with it in a different way. It doesn't hurt so much. But when none of that's happened, it's kind of all compacted inside you, then these little triggers kind of poke, and it hurts because you feel all those blockages and all the unprocessed negative feelings that you don't know what to do with, and you just kind of you kind of go into a protesting, growling feeling. You almost lose your capacity to speak.
So what do you do in that case? Like, how do you then work with somebody that has had a lot of past hurts and are overreacting and becoming triggered?
Right. Well, that's a good question, because I see it kind of almost every day in my consulting room. What I do with them is ask them, what does this remind you of? So if they're saying, I'm really angry right now because, you know, my wife promised she would come out with me tomorrow night to a business meeting, and now she's reneged. I'm furious with her. She keeps letting me down. I hate, you know, and I'm really angry, and it's hurting me because I feel betrayed. Then I say, okay, so what does this remind you of? And invariably, that person will tell me about a situation when they were a child, when they were betrayed by a parent or a aunt or a friend or a teacher or whoever it might be. And, you know, when you think about it in adult language, it doesn't seem a lot, but to that child, it was their whole world. It was everything. They were relying on that person for something that mattered a lot to them because they were not in power. They were not in control. They had to rely on others. And so they were let down. They were betrayed. They had a feeling of abandonment, of not being important enough. And that's a grief experience because you feel the grief of not being important enough to your loved one or to the person who's supposed to care about you. And that's a sense of loss. It's a huge loss. It's bigger than any other kind of loss because you lose your sense of self and you don't have any kind of foundation under you. So once we kind of go in the therapy session to what they can remember, all of a sudden they'll remember a million other things that made them feel that way, and they go ting 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 ting, all the bells go ring and say, oh my God, that's what it reminds me of. And then they can put their present experience in context. And then we begin to unravel all those things that got buried, that never got attended to, never got attention, never got a chance to heal. And slowly, slowly, we heal all those wounds by reframing them. So they experience them as maybe at age 2 or 6 or 10 or whatever. And now in the therapy, we talk to that little child who's 2-year-old. What are you feeling? How do you want to respond when your mom says, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's just a cat, grow up or something"? What would you like to say to her? So they get to do with me in the role play what they couldn't do then, and that's the healing process of those old wounds. And then the grief goes because there's no sense of loss. They get to recover that time, that moment, that situation, and redo it, albeit with me, but it's the healing process. And it takes a long time, but they gradually feel like they have recovered the loss. It's no longer a loss because they've stood up for themselves. They haven't lost themselves anymore. They've recovered it. They don't depend on the other one to take care of them. They're now taking care of themselves. And a lot of grief recovery is revaluing yourself and not giving all the power to everybody else to hurt you.
So if you were not attended and nurtured to as a child, and now you find yourself grown up and trying to be in a relationship or parenting children, trying to figure out how to heal yourself and how to give tools to your children that you may not even really have because you weren't given them, like what are the particular techniques or tools that you help in terms of your clients? Is this a way you kind of reconnect them with their past as a child?
Yes, absolutely, all the time. It's always about what it reminds you of, because we all have our own personal histories, and what wounds one person doesn't wound another. So very often in adult relationships, when you tell your partner, it really hurt me when I asked you if you'd, what happened yesterday. I know you went to meet. This just happened 1 hour ago. My client was saying he went to his wife and he asked her, I know you went to meet with members of your family yesterday. What was it like? Do you want to share it with me? I'm curious to know what happened. And he said his wife said, "Oh, nothing much. Was it about your mom?" "No." So I said, "Well, what did you do?" Because he felt dejected. He felt wounded. And it was a loss because he wanted to connect and he wasn't able to connect. And I said, "What did you do?" "Nothing, just walked away." So I said, so this is something that you do on a regular basis. You don't tell your partner what you're feeling. And that's what happened when he was a kid. He was so worried about upsetting his mother if he dared to say, "But Mom, I need you to look at what I just did," or "I'm scared that when you go on a business trip with Dad, you're not going to come back. I'm terrified and I'm scared." And she said, "Oh, just grow up and stop crying, and I've got enough on my plate." So he got used to not saying anything, and now he's doing the same thing with his wife. So he's just feeling wounded and hurt, and he's very, very sad because he's feeling unwanted and unimportant.
So is it as simple as just encouraging to speak out and to speak out to those that you love and to let them know how you're feeling from youth to?
It's not simple for them because they've got used to not saying it, because when they were growing up, if they dared to say it, they would have been told off, they would have been punished, they would have been treated in a way that it wasn't kind of worth it to them. So we might say it's really easy, but to them it isn't. They are imagining that the same punishments that they experienced as a child is now going to happen with their partner, so they don't do it. And most of what I hear is, oh, it's not worth it. She's going to get upset. She's going to get angry. She's going to punish me. She'll do this, that, and the other.
Yeah. So it's just the importance of communication is huge.
And
it really is, because you're doing two things. One is you're helping your partner to understand the impact that they have on you, because they have no idea. If you don't show it, you just walk away and you can keep on doing it. They just assume that it's not hurting you, that they're not causing you sadness and grief. They have no idea, and they keep doing it. So the grief and the wound gets bigger, and the grief gets more complicated because it's old stuff, new stuff. It all gets mixed up. You can't unravel it. And so what I suggest to my patients is that, look, you're already in pain. So the pain of doing it can't be any worse. And what are you imagining? Does it actually happen? So kind of do a reality check. We practice it so that they begin to feel more comfortable with it. And then what happens is they can undo the old wounds by having a different experience. And what I told my patient this morning, 1 hour ago, was if you keep feeling that wound and that grief at the loss of not having someone attend to you and respond to you when you reach out to them, all you're doing is strengthening the grief circuits in your brain, that you're powerless, that you're a victim, that you just have to feel loss all the time and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's just going to get worse. And each time it happens, you're going to have an even bigger reaction. But if you choose to say what you feel, because you're not little anymore, what I normally say is, you know what, you're not, whatever their name is, let's say it's Joe. I say, you're not little Joe anymore. It was little Joe who felt powerless and helpless. But now you're big Joe. You're 37 years old. You're married. You have a family. You're a working man. You can say, it really hurt me when you brushed me off just now, when I was just trying to reach out and connect with you. I'm really interested in what happened in your family meeting. Could you do? And then when I put it that way, he had a whole different reaction, because he suddenly realized that he was coming from little Joe's place, and he was not accessing big Joe, who does have words, who does have authority, who does have power. Little Joe didn't, because if he told his mother, Mom, I don't like it when you brush me off and tell me that my knee's not supposed to hurt when it does. I don't like it when you do that. Then he's going to feel that his mother's going to get more angry and reject him even more, so he can't take a chance. But in his adult Joe can, because all he's saying is, look, I'm disappointed and I'm hurt when you brushed me off. Just wanted you to know. So then he's making new neural circuits in the brain, and he's making the old grief and wound circuits reduce in their intensity, so that next time he has a new circuit to go on, and he can strengthen that one. And that's one of the ways in which you can take care of yourself now when you're feeling wounded and heal the old wounds at the same time.
And you actually mentioned that we have to mourn the loss of what we didn't get as a child. You were talking to me about that last time I was on the phone. Can you explain that, and just how having the loss of not being good enough in terms of your parent?
Right.
Can you talk more about that?
Yes. Yeah, well, I'll tell you about several of my clients who have long-term anxiety or depression, panic issues. They don't go away with medication or just cognitive therapy or whatever. What I usually find is they've come from a background where they had very emotionally negligent parents. That they took care of them really well in terms of feeding them, clothing them, sending them to good schools, extracurricular activities, good bedtime routines. They weren't. They had structure. They weren't necessarily, doing anything untoward. They weren't hitting their kids. They weren't sexually abusing them or molesting. Nothing like that. But they were absent emotionally. So, one of my clients felt like, her mother would just disappear and into another world, and she couldn't connect with her, or she'd go into her room for days with depression and not come out, and then she'd be so angry and blame everything on my client, like it's all your fault that the house is in a mess and you've got to do this, that, and the other. And then when my client needed her for nurturing and just to be there, just to kind of maybe cook together or go for a walk together, her mother was absent, her father was emotionally absent, and so on. So she's grown up, and this has happened to several of my patients. They've grown up with this wish, this fantasy that they would have the perfect parent who was attuned to them. Oh, you're sad? Come tell me all about it, comfort them, let me know, accept it. If they were bullied in school, paying attention, not just going and, telling the principal to make sure my daughter's not bullied anymore. It's actually holding them, talking to them, being emotionally available, taking them seriously as individuals. So these children grow up with a wish to have this perfect parent who would do that. And it's what I call a fantasy of rescue. So they don't grieve for the loss of what they didn't have, because they're hanging on to the wish that one day it will happen. One day, if I'm good enough, if I sacrifice enough in life, if I'm a good girl, a good boy, I'm the perfect son, the perfect daughter, the perfect brother, sister, spouse, cousin, whatever, then somehow my parents will see, and they will come and get down on their bended knees and beg for my forgiveness and scoop me up in their arms and give me everything I ever wanted and rescue me. So that means I cannot take care of myself. I have to wait for them. And that gets in the way of grieving for the parent they didn't have. Because in reality, if you talk to them, their intelligent self, they know their parents are not going to change. They know they've been banging their heads against a brick wall, that all their perfectionism and attempts have done nothing to help their parents be any more attuned or attentive to them. But that's an intellectualization. In their emotional selves, in their heart, they're still carrying that wish. And when I talk about mourning, they get very afraid, because to them it means they have to give up the parent in their imagination and their fantasy, which is the only good thing they've got. Why else have I done all this work? Why else have I worked so hard to be a martyr, a slave, a perfect son, daughter? It's a big investment. You mean it was all not worth it? They can't give it up. So without that, they get stuck. And it's called complicated grief. It's not irregular grief where a pet dies and you have a few days mourning and you might create an album and pictures and maybe get another pet and move on. Or, like an elderly person that you're expecting to get ill. It's kind of like when someone dies tragically in an unexpected way, in an accident or in a shooting or in a combat or something totally unexpected, brain hemorrhage or something, and you haven't prepared for it. So that, and you don't want to lose that. You can't bear to lose it because you weren't ready. So you hang on to it and hang on to it and hang on to it. I'll never forget one client I had who was married, and his wife died. She was an air stewardess, and she was traveling, and she just suddenly had a heart attack and died on the plane. And he was informed by the company that he worked for, and he never got over it. He made a shrine in his house. Whatever was in the fridge on the day she died, it was still there 10 years later when I was treating him for grief and depression. Yeah. And he left everything exactly as it was, in the hope. He had this fantasy that she would come back. And he felt guilty that maybe he hadn't loved her enough. Maybe he hadn't given her everything she wanted. And he had this particular guilt that, he had not wanted to have children and she did. And he thought that was what made her die, that it was his fault. And similarly with other clients, when they haven't had the kind of care, the emotional care from their living parents, they think it's their fault, that they did something wrong. They weren't good enough. They didn't match expectations. If they were a boy, they should have been a girl. If they were a girl, they should have been a boy. If they, whatever. My father wanted me to be a hockey player and I was useless at it, whatever. They always look for reasons why they failed their parents. And then they create this fantasy parent in their mind to keep that hole, because there's a big hole inside you. And they fill up that hole with the fantasy. So it's really hard for them to grieve and mourn. But until they do, we can't get down to making space and opportunity for relief and for new healthy relationships to take its place.
Is it harder if it's a sudden death in terms of losing someone?
It is, but the worst of all is not having the kind of parent you wanted, because that's something we're all entitled to when we're born, and if you've never had it, that's the worst possible loss you could imagine.
And in terms of...
Okay, wait. Oh, can you repeat that one more time? I think that was pretty strong. So basically, the importance of parenting for the kids is huge.
Yes. What I said was we're all entitled when we are born to have emotionally attuned parents that show us and care about us emotionally. They're emotionally available. Mm-hmm. If we don't get that, it's the biggest and most profoundly disturbing loss, because you can never recover that. So that's why the children go into fantasy of this parent, this ideal, and they often pick partners who may represent that ideal, only to find, unfortunately, that they're human and they're also going to abandon you in some way, shape, or form. And that's what triggers them. So that's the worst possible loss. If you had a parent who died suddenly in a car accident, but they had been an attuned parent, an available parent, a responsive parent, you had your birthright. Then you have something to mourn, because you had it in the beginning to lose. But if you've never had it, to mourn something you've never had that was your birthright, that is the hardest thing of all. And that's what I have to work with my clients, because they're always wanting this one thing that they've never got, and they keep trying. Well, I'll do this, and I'll do that, and I'll try this, and maybe I did this wrong, and they're full of guilt and shame. And I have another client who's also a therapist who was brought up in a home where she was the youngest child. She wasn't planned. And her mother was always busy taking care of the house, other kids. Her father, got ill from time to time, and she was drawn into taking care of her dad, but she never felt wanted. She never felt good enough. Her mother never was attuned to her and still isn't. And now she's coming to the point of having to deal with her mother actually dying. Her mother's in her late 80s. She has to have some heart surgery. They've never been close. Her mother's always been very critical and always making her feel inadequate, insufficient, so no matter what she does, it's never enough, it's never good enough, it's just, there's no warmth, there's no validation, there's nothing. So she tries to do that in her life outside her family, and she's ridden with guilt. And now she's coming up against... She already didn't have a mom growing up, basically, right? She was the mom to her dad. She didn't have a mom. Never was she hugged and, told, tell me what's going on, or what are you feeling, or whatever. It was always taking care of her mother's feelings or her dad's illness or whatever. So now, not having had an actual mom in the emotional sense, she now has to deal with the imminent loss of her physical mother. And I can tell you, it's really hard. Because now she has to lose two moms, the mom she never had and the bad mom that she's about to lose, and the guilt that goes with it.
And I can say, Jeanette, as you're talking, you're also speaking to my childhood, because I had a mom that was emotionally unable to take care of my brothers and I had a father that shut down. And as you're talking and describing these things, it's literally just triggering my heart. And yeah, I have to say, I've been, for my own self, I've been experiencing just 20 years of, trying to find healing and tools, and it's really challenging and difficult. And as aware as I can become and gain tools, I still find myself, it's almost like you constantly are searching for that validation from the parent, from the nurturing that you didn't get, and you start realizing what's happening, and then you try and change the course, but it's difficult, because it's, when you don't have parents that can explain to you and help you emotionally there's things that you just don't understand in terms of healthy emotional boundaries or things like that. Or if somebody shuts down, I definitely am more apt to want to help them and forego my own feelings. And even when someone does shut down, it definitely triggers me to my own parents that shut down, and it's just painful. It's painful as a child seeing your parents emotionally going through something that you don't understand, and understanding, not at that time, but now, that you need something, and then feeling so confused as a child. So if there's someone listening now and they feel like this also resonates with them, what do you think that could possibly help them? And, or if, we do have some kids that do listen, if they're currently living with a parent who shuts down, what should the child do? Because honestly, like, if I was a kid and I heard you, I would want to know, like, what could I do for, like, my mom and dad to help, or even help myself out of this situation, because it's painful.
Well, they're two different questions, so let me address the adult one first, because like you said, you are getting triggered right now. So Completely. If I'm talking to you and anyone else who's experiencing those triggers, here's what I would suggest. You have to start speaking to that parent from your painful place, and the best way to do it is to write it down. Because there's so much research that shows that when you put your pain and sense of loss, I wish this, I wish that, start from that place. I wish this could have happened. I wish when I had asked you this, I wish when we were in this place or that situation. So start from that place and write them down, and what you felt at not being able to have it. So you've got to give yourself a voice from the place of wishing and the grief place, what you experienced as a result of not having it, and how you feel when you know, and this happens all the time with people in this situation, other people are wanting to kind of make up for it, to compensate, and they want to support you or help you or, just be there for you. It's not the same. And I often find that people in this situation, they reject the help that other people want to give them because the wish is for the parent to do it. Look, I know you mean well, and it's very nice of you, and I'm grateful, but you know what? It doesn't quite touch that spot.
Is it the parent, though, Jeanette? Because I always feel I have moments where I've trusted, and then all of a sudden it's not there, like the person shuts down, and then it reminds me of my parents again, and so I go into the why bother sharing how I really feel, why bother?
Yeah. But that's a defense mechanism. That's a way to prevent you from trying it out and getting the same lack of response. It doesn't mean you still don't wish for it. In your fantasy, you wish that parent would not shut down, would be available, would be attuned, would be responsive. That's the parent we're speaking to. We develop all sorts of defenses to prevent us from going back into that vulnerable place because we have to survive. But what I'm trying to share with you in my experience is that the grief process, this complicated grief that people get stuck in, it's because one part of them says, and it happens a lot in therapy, and it makes me cry sometimes because I'm giving them everything that they want, or their wife is, or their brother is, or whoever's being available to them, and they won't take it. They kind of recognize it intellectually, they accept it at some level, they're grateful, and they express that gratitude, but they won't swallow it. And it's kind of like, when a child would say, I want chocolate ice cream, and mom's feeding Sheila, and I'm Joe, and I want mom to feed me. But I have Daisy who says, okay, I'll feed you. Mom's busy, I'll feed you. No, I want mom to do it. And they won't have the ice cream, and they'll wait for mom. That's how it is. I often find that these people are really well loved and taken care of by their spouses or whoever it might be in their lives that they're sharing their struggles with. But they won't let themselves swallow it because doing it means they have to accept that they didn't have that parent. And that means you have to mourn the loss. And they're not willing to do it. It takes years with some of these clients to let me in and to help them fill that gap.
Why do you think they're not willing to do it? Like, I'm trying to think of myself. I'm like, why?
But you've got to give up that fantasy of that parent that you didn't have. Imagine, just imagine for a moment if you allowed yourself to completely buy into the idea that your parents didn't have time for you, that they didn't give a shit about you, that they had you just because you came along, and you were a nuisance to them, and you were supposed to take care of them and you failed, or whatever.
I feel like I'm going to throw up right now.
You can't live like that. You cannot live like that. You would die inside. You would hurt yourself. You would have suicidal ideation. You would overdose. That's what happens. You cannot do that outside of a therapeutic situation where somebody puts one spoonful of good stuff in and you take one spoonful and throw it out. That's how it has to be. It can't be all out and nothing. It's very, very, very delicate. It's very delicate because you have a template for what you want and from the person you want it. I mean, I've been working with a guy for 10 years whose mother was a nurse and completely emotionally absent, and his father was an abusive drunk. And he longed for his mother to see to him. He actually set fire to himself so she would notice. And all she said was, "Oh, come over here. I'll put a bandage on." He threw himself off a tree to injure himself so she would see. No, nothing. Nothing with that. He just criticized. Okay. So now he's in therapy and he's talking about all his, the same feelings he's having about neglect, uncared for, unimportant, invisible, abused, verbally abused and emotionally abused. He's having all the exact same experiences with his wife. And it's taken me 9 years, coming 3 times and now twice a week, to get him to see that his wife is not doing the same thing. He's just unwilling to take in the good stuff. It's got to be exactly the way he wanted it.
It's interesting, though, because I know for me, growing up, having 2 parents that had a lot of loss and grief in their own lives, that they did emotionally shut down, I found that I resorted to emotionally taking care of myself by going into the closet and literally crying in the closet. So as an adult, I have this side of me that that I definitely have hidden. And in the recent years, as I've been healing my own grief, I've noticed that it's, this part of me has been coming up, and it's because it's the part that I've really just pushed down. But when she does come up, and it's like I feel like she's having a temper tantrum, and she's literally 3 or 4 years old, and it's a little bit surprising. And if I feel safe with someone, it's amazing that I am able to express myself, but I have to say at the same time, it's scary to have emotions and be verbally caught at 3 years old. It's surprising. And then it's how to work through that, and then how to work through that with another person who may also be like, what is going on here? This isn't how you normally react. What do you do? How do you navigate that terrain?
Well, it is how you normally react, because it doesn't just happen once. It happens over and over again. And just like you're going through your stuff and coming out and protesting and then growing from that, the secret is in the other person accepting it and not taking it personally and being okay with it, because that's what your parents would have done if you had a temper tantrum. They wouldn't have just walked out on you. If they were good parents, they'd have said, okay, when you're ready, calm down, tell me all about it, we'll be okay again. So that's what it's about. It's about people giving you the opportunity to have your little experience and not take it as a breach in the relationship that's a big serious rift. It's part of your growing. You have to get it out. It's kind of like I say, everything is stuck inside, like you're constipated, and little by little it's going to come out. But the problem is you don't want it to come out because it's painful and because it hurts. Imagine being constipated. When you go to the bathroom, it hurts when it comes out. It's not comfortable, and you'd rather hold it in than feel that pain. That's what's happening with these people. They'd rather hold it in because they've got used to it, and they get embarrassed by showing it because they're showing a part of themselves that's very young and out of control. But it needs to come out because you cannot grieve otherwise. There's no room.
And then what about when you're feeling feelings of guilt added onto it? Because once you have an emotional reaction like this, sometimes I'll feel embarrassed or ashamed or even guilt. How do you work through that then to reconnect with a person that that this happened with?
these are normal feelings, and it's not the only time you feel guilt. This is part of your sense of self, that if you dare to express something you need, and you dare to do it in a way that feels maybe selfish, then you're going to feel guilty and embarrassed, because that's your childhood. You can't do anything at the time but let it be and talk to yourself that this is okay. This is part of my growth. It's a developmental cycle. It's not you being, a dick. And it's about explaining that, to yourself that.
But sometimes you kind of feel like you're being an arse.
What?
Sometimes you feel like you're being mean, like it's when that comes out, and it is that you're not being so nice.
Yes, that's little you. I would say that's little Henry. It's not big Henry.
I call her
big
stomping
Henry.
girl. That's what I call her, stomping girl.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. And she needs to stomp from time to time. And the more she does it, and the more she then puts it into words, because you imagine the developmental sequence. An infant would cry and hit things and throw things. A toddler would throw and bang and kick. A child older on would maybe go in the closet. Someone else might run away. Someone else might break things. Someone else might call you names. But eventually we come to using words. And the research is, when you put something into words that comes from a very painful, angry, deprived place, as something you're entitled to, that's the emotional center of your brain. You want to engage it with the more rational part of your brain in the front, the precortex. And so when the two act together, you're putting your emotions into words. That makes you feel normal again, that you can have a handle on it. You're not out of control. You're not just acting out. Because if you were just acting out, you'd go and take drugs, or you'd do some other harmful thing to yourself, alcohol, drugs, whatever, get wasted, and so on. And that's even more embarrassing. But once you start putting things into words, so I do definitely recommend writing journals, writing how you feel when you have it, talking to the other person who made you feel that way, and having a dialogue with them in your mind, because then you're doing what you couldn't do before, and you're healing that part of you. You're giving yourself that opportunity that was missed out on early. And yes, you might feel guilt and shame and all the rest of it, but that's normal. There's nothing wrong with that. You need to feel those things. That's how we grow.
Can you explain why a child would feel guilt? I understand them wanting attention, but can you explain the guilt?
Yeah, sure. So let's take that client I told you who was the youngest child, and she wasn't expected, and her dad was sick from time to time, and her mom was busy and cold. She felt guilty because she knew she wasn't wanted. She was an accident, and her parents were Catholic, so they didn't have an abortion. They went through with the pregnancy, but she wasn't wanted, and her mother didn't want her at all. So that was number one, the guilt of being in this family when you're not supposed to be. The second guilt was about being a burden on her mother, who was already busy with kids and a household and a sick father. The third issue of guilt was, I'm not doing enough to take care of my mother. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be here anyway, so now I need to pay my way. I need to prove that I have something to contribute and offer to this family. So I need to do chores and this and that and the other. And if I don't do it because I'm a kid and I want to go play, or I want to be with my friends, or I want to watch TV or whatever, then the guilt is enormous. So that's one aspect of guilt. Another aspect of guilt in children is when they grow up in families that are codependent. The parents make these kids feel that you're the one that needs to make me happy. I have a client now who was one of two children. He's the brother, and he had one sister, and he had a mom. The father left when he was 2, and the mother would use him as her comfort. So he became her only source of comfort. So his whole childhood was obliterated. He had to take care of her all the time, and he never knew when she needed him or when she didn't. And anytime he needed a bit of validation or attention or recognition, and he would try to get it from her, she wouldn't give it. And there were times when she just left him and abandoned him and dumped him with parents of her millionth boyfriend or whatever. And he would say, when you coming back? When you coming back? And she would say, oh, I'm coming. And he never came. So at the age of 16, he decided to leave. He couldn't take it anymore. And guess what? He married a woman exactly like his mother. But the guilt of leaving his mother was unbelievable because he was her caretaker. Can you imagine walking out on someone that you take care of, who's been the source of your life, who's been the only thing you've ever known? The guilt is unbelievable. And of course, the same thing happened with his girlfriend. That's when he came to therapy with me. He realized that he was feeling the same trap and the same discomfort of trying to take care of his girlfriend, and he wasn't having a life of his own. So then he started having an affair to get out of the trap. And he realized he couldn't handle it, so came to therapy, and I showed him that he was feeling the same guilt about leaving this girlfriend who turned out to be exactly like his mother, depressed and needy. And, I'm still helping him several months later because he's having similar issues. He's trying to get over the guilt. I mean, it took me about 9 months to help him step away from the guilt, the intensity of the guilt, so that he can feel good about himself and not feel like he's harming women and taking advantage of them by trying to have a life of his own.
Now, Doctor, we only have 1 minute or so, but we have a question from social media that we wanted to ask you. Go ahead, Taj.
The question is, what would you say to those people who have a misconception that people who seek professional help, like from a psychiatrist, are crazy?
Well, the first thing I'd say is they're actually the strongest and bravest people on this earth because they are recognizing that they can't manage things on their own and they don't want to harm themselves anymore. They want to have a corrective experience. The people who don't do it are the ones who are not wanting to face reality and wanting to live in a way that's unhealthy and unharmful. They're not crazy. They've been treated in a very bad way, and they're coming to get healed.
I love that answer.
That's great.
Yes,
it's a wonderful answer. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jeanette. It was wonderful having you, and I know we learned a lot, and I'm sure all our listeners did as well. So we can't thank you enough for joining us today.
We appreciate you.
Yes.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm so happy to get a chance to share the suffering of other people and how it can be alleviated.
Thank you so much. Maybe we'll have you on again.
Okay. Thank you, too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. So, that was amazing.
Yes.
That was incredible.
That was really good.
I feel like it was my personal therapy session. And I'm losing my voice as I'm saying that. I obviously have to go do some writing in my journal on some of my emotions that are coming up right now.
No, that's something that she said that was really important is writing, writing how you're feeling down. And that was my takeaway, was writing how you're feeling down. And if one from the past, someone that hurt you, that you may realize there may be some loss, not a strong connection. You got to write how you feel and maybe sit them down and talk with them.
Write a letter.
That's
write
important.
a letter.
Because I think a lot of us in society, we run away from that issue. And I appreciated how she was encouraging us to tackle it head on.
Absolutely.
So, it was great.
So we are building a community of support on our social media.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So last week I did not do due diligence in terms of reading our handles. So as we only have a couple of minutes, I want to make sure that we read them. So Taj.
You're going to make me read them? You
I'm
should be
gonna
reading them.
I'm going to make you read them.
Okay. Twitter, it's at DDJ Foundation. Facebook, it's Dee Jackson Foundation. Instagram, it's at Dee Jackson Foundation. And the website is www.ddjf.org.
If you are here in Los Angeles area and are interested in working with Dr. Jeanette Raymond, You can reach her at 310-985-2491. You can also go to her website. It's www.dr.jeanetteraymond.com.
Great. And we are fundraising for our next Music Heals class for children who are suffering loss and grief to find hope and inspiration. And we hope that if you find what we are doing is helpful to you, then you will help us turn grief into positive action. A donation of any amount will make a huge impact on a child's life and empower them to grieve, grow, and heal. Thank you very much for considering this opportunity to make a difference with us. And please spread the word. The more donations and more support we have, then the more kids that we can help.
And another disclaimer, again, the four of us, Taj, Cheryl, TJ, and Henry, we are not licensed therapists. And if you feel you need help, please seek professional help. Another thing I want to say is to all of our listeners, we will be back here next Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you have any questions you want answered, please send them to us. Taj already gave you the social media handles, right, Taj?
Yes, I did.
You can visit us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter as well. Like Henry said earlier, this is a community that we are building, so we cannot thrive without your support. If you're listening to the recording of our show and want to share your questions that you've had about loss and grief or share your story, please use social media.
Thank you.
Alrighty, I guess that's it. Till next week. Adios.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Power of Love. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Support for our Power of Love radio show comes from a variety of generous donors, including supporters from institutions, individuals, and corporations through the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. DDJF is a nonprofit 501c3 organization.
Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Power of Love radio show, only on LA Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Power of Love radio show, sponsored by the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. We believe that through the power of love, that nothing is impossible with love on your side. And I'm Henry, and I'm here in the studio with Taj and Terrell, and TJ is on the phone.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
We are live, so if you are listening to us right now, thank you for joining us. This is show number 8. Later on, we will be opening it up to taking a few questions via Twitter. So if you have any questions about our topic, which is loss and grief, and you want to ask, then send us a tweet at Tosh Jackson.
It's at DDJ Foundation.
And we are not licensed therapists. We are just people who've experienced death and loss in our lives and have been impacted by it. And today we are going to be talking about the unexpected loss of good health and robustness. These losses may include comfort, sexual function, career, income, freedom, cognitive function, intimacy, pride, joy, self-esteem, self-control, independence, mental health, hope, dignity, and certainty. In the most extreme cases, one's loss of health may bring about all of these losses, so sometimes over and over again in many ways. Grief is mourning after any kind of loss, and it is a normal, healthy response to grieve the loss of your health or the health of a loved one through either a disease such as cancer or from an unexpected accident that has changed a person's physical abilities. Every person will experience grief at some time. We all feel it in our own individual way, and a person in grief may feel shock, disbelief, longing, anger, sadness, and acceptance. And it can help to view grief as a process. Feelings may change and then come back, and grief may never go away completely, but the pain it causes will lessen over time as you work through these feelings. And our guest this week is Davis McLeod Haynes, and he can probably maybe attest to this. Davis is a talented musician and here to share his inspirational story of how he had a second chance at life. When he was 21 years old, he was riding a bike in Chicago when an 18-wheeler misjudged how close he was to Davis and accidentally ran Davis over. Davis went under the tire, and some of his injuries included internal bleeding. His pelvis was broken in 7 places. He had a broken right femur. Both of his lungs collapsed. He lost part of his colon and intestines. The doctors told Davis's family that he had a 1% chance of living. And now, 5 years later, Davis is here with us to share his miracle story. Welcome, Davis.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, an 18-wheeler. That is amazing that you were here and that you survived. Can you share with us about this story, what you remember of it?
Yeah, so it was a typical, beautiful summer day in Chicago, July 11th. I was coming back from Millennium Park. If you know Chicago, they have Free Music Mondays. And so I was with some of my friends. We had been at the lake earlier that day, and we were riding to go to my friend's fundraiser. He was raising money to go to Alaska to build a church or something. That's exactly what it was, actually. And I was on my way home, and my twin brother and my friend Jove, who were with me, they went on without me because I stopped to get a sandwich. And then, I was on Clark Street, pulled up next to this truck. I could feel that he was right next to me, but I was used to it. Riding in Chicago is pretty dangerous. There's not too many great lanes, so I was real close. And it was a 5-way intersection. The light turned green. He was trying to go right. I was trying to go left. I was hoping that he would get ahead of me before I could go behind him and catch back on going to the left on Clark. And he ended up hitting me with what I assume is like the back cab of his truck, and then knocked me off my bike, and I went underneath his back right tires.
So literally the truck went over you.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you remember after that?
I just remember waking up on the ground, and kind of like in the movies, it felt like all of a sudden everybody was staring at me like I was in some hole, and they were all looking down at me or something. And I remember like a few faces. I just remember thinking clearly something had happened. I wasn't in a lot of pain, but I was having trouble breathing, and I looked down at my arm, and I saw this one thing on my arm that I think it had like a rock in it or something, and there was blood. So I figured something was going on.
Did you, there was someone that came over and he immediately kind of assisted because people were trying to move you, right?
Yeah, there's a couple people trying to pull me off the street, I guess, to both, I don't know, take me out of harm's way, but also, I was right in the middle of the street causing a disturbance to traffic. So he, from what I understand, that he saw that happen. He knew that they shouldn't be doing that because I could have killed me. So he came over and stopped him and told him that he was a firefighter because he knew that they would listen. I found out later that he's actually an unemployed mover, but he just knew that if he said he was a firefighter, people would listen to him, and he knew what to do. Even though I'm not even sure he was trained or anything, he just felt like he knew he had to come. And
what did he do at the scene that you think that's pivotal to actually saving your life?
Yeah, so he held my head up, in his hand, and he just kept looking at me. And just kept talking to me, trying to keep me awake because I lost a lot of blood, so I was sort of drifting in and out. Is what it felt like. And
did you feel like you were in pain at any point?
I don't. It was like so overwhelming. I feel like I didn't even.
Could you even register that you were actually hit by an 18-wheeler?
No, and I've heard stories because there were so many people at that intersection. I've heard stories of people say that at one point I did try to stand up. I don't remember doing that. But I clearly could not. So I guess I like fell back down. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would have looked like because I was so broken. So I don't remember a lot of that. I just knew something was serious. It was almost like in a weird way. It felt like I was the way you felt as a kid when you were about to get in trouble. Like I just knew something was very serious. That's just the only thing I could think about. It's just like, all right, cool. And so I just kept breathing.
And then he you said that at some point he just kept looking you in the eyes, and do you feel like this is what kept you alive and what he was saying to you?
Yeah, so like I read later, and I've been to some I've read some books on near-death experiences, and I've been to some meetings with different people who've been through it, and they say that when you are leaving your body, in the process of dying, one of your anchors is to look into people's eyes. That's where you seek life. So you see that they are alive, and there's this connection, and it's sort of like spiritual, like hands or something, like holding on to each other. He kept me there.
And do you feel like you had a near-death experience?
Yeah, I definitely do. It was I feel like I was in space, it's kind of what it felt like. But everything was blissful, I suddenly lost all human burden, There was no stress, there was no schedule, there was no unreturned emails or any of that stuff, like all those things that bring us down little by little all day, all of that was gone. And it was pure peace, I can understand. It felt like heaven, it felt like it was just very... it was pure bliss.
And then you woke up in the ICU, and what happened after that?
Yeah, so they put me on the ambulance, and that guy kept saying that he was going to come visit me, and so I remember hearing that, and then I remember I was like sort of blacked out in the ambulance, and then when I got to the ICU, one of the last things I remember was they sent my twin brother in. I found out later, they sent him in to say goodbye, because most of my family was in Alabama, so they couldn't get up in time. So they pretty much just chose him to come say goodbye, just in case.
And wait, you said that the doctors told your twin brother that there was a 1% chance of you actually living.
Right. So in a way, it was weird. He was so... What it felt like, sometimes I describe it as being like Huck Finn at his own funeral, like I saw the way Charles looked. He looked like I was...
Charles is your twin brother?
He's my twin, sorry, yeah. He looked like I had already died, in a way. He was just bawling. I mean, I've never seen him broken like that. And so he told me he loved me. I told him I loved him, and he said, I'm here. And I said, I'm here too. And I knew I wasn't going to die, but clearly he did. He thought I would, so...
That must have been really scary to hear that not only is your brother, but he's your twin brother,
right,
that you may have a 1% chance of living, and the doctor's asking him to come in and say goodbye on behalf of your whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, the doctors are probably all rushing around you. What was your body at that point? Like, what?
Oh man, it was totally broken. My family was trying to ask whatever questions they could, like, would I walk again? Would I be paralyzed? And they were like, we're not even at that point yet. We have to figure out if he's going to make it at all. So it was I was so messed up in my pelvic and lower stomach region and everything that even when they had to reset my femur.
So can you list the injuries you had?
Yeah, my pelvis was broken in 7 places. And keep in mind, I'm doing my best because I wasn't actually there for this. And I've tried to talk to my family about it, but it's still a little, confusing for me because I was, either unconscious or on, a lot of drugs. So I had 7 pelvic fractures. My femur was broken, my fibula. I lost some of my colon and small intestine, and both my lungs collapsed. Yeah. I had some weird shoulder, just little minor things around, and I had some chipped spinal vertebrae, so I was really close to losing my ability to walk.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And you're 21.
Yeah, I was 21.
Wow.
And I think the doctors say that was a huge part of my recovery was my youth. Because if that had happened to anyone, I think if it had happened to me now, I still would have struggled more than I did when I was at that point.
And you also had lost a lot of blood. How much?
Mm-hmm.
How many units of blood did they have to give you?
I'm pretty sure they had to give me 13. And
so
I think
it was a dire
I
situation.
think there's 12 units in the body, so I'm pretty sure I got an entire human body's worth of blood.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was it like then in the hospital the first few days and with your family and friends?
From what I understand, it was, miserable. Sounded like kind of a living hell for them. They were trying to support each other. A lot of my family tried to fly up. They sort of had to be gatekeepers of who could be let in. Just from one of the stories, I was real. I didn't look very good. I'm sure. I think I was real swollen. They say when you get an IV and whatnot, and they were just trying to hold it together. I can't imagine.
Was it a shock seeing you?
I think so. Yeah. Especially for
were you
my
really
brother,
scraped up
who was,
from?
Yeah, I had some what they call road rash, where you kind of, where you're, trying to use words that aren't too onomatopoeic, but, scraped across the ground, basically. They had to, like, pick little pieces of road out of my skin and stuff,
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So did you literally have, like, the tire mark over you?
I think at one point I did, yeah. It was a bruise in the shape of a tire, which was just crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was it scary that your life seemed to change in an instant?
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird because in some ways I just had started understanding what it meant to be in the present moment. And so I, in some ways, just adopted this new reality. And that was a survival tactic, I think. Just, I couldn't even think about what life was like, 5 minutes ago. So it's sort of like when you don't know that your head's or your stomach's okay until you have a stomach ache, and then it's like, then all of a sudden you're like, man, why isn't I think pain comes from the contrast, like you're like, I know what it feels like to not be in pain, so to be in pain right now is suffering because it's just different. I can feel it. I know what it's like to not have this. So I feel like when I was in that accident, I just had to embrace the fact that this was my new reality, because they say that the pelvis is the most painful bone in the body to break.
And you broke it in 7 places.
Yeah. I mean, the most painful experience I can remember was sitting up in the wheelchair for the first time. I listened to The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. That was the only way I could. That was like the only way I could get through that experience. And they had to do it so quickly because, they wanted the bones to heal right. They wanted the muscles to build back correctly. And so, the PTs that are in the hospital have a bad reputation of being harsh and cruel, but I had some great ones. I knew that they were just they just had to be, they just couldn't let me not sit up, because even though it was super painful, I needed to. And then they had to train me how to use a transfer board, which is basically like a snowboard kind of looking thing, just like a tray, but I had to like shimmy across like onto the bed or back onto the, like, slide down it. I couldn't put any pressure. I was non-weight bearing, so I couldn't use my legs for 3 months.
How much time between the accident and you actually sitting up was it?
That was like a week and a couple days. Or a week.
Wow, they really put you up fast.
I had to, yeah.
Did you have to learn how to re-walk everything?
Yeah. I mean, like, all of my brain, like, the crazy thing was that I could feel, especially being 21, my spirit was like sprinting, but then my body, it was really like my muscles just weren't there. So, there's actually, we filmed it just because it was so interesting, but I like my first few steps, because I could just barely put them, move them forward, and like all this blood started rushing to my legs that hadn't been there for a while. I was trying to do like exercises in the bed to prepare, but there's nothing like actually walking. And I still, to this day, I mean, I take walking for granted, but I sure didn't those days, because, I had like people who were supporting me, and it was scary, because they warned me. They're like, if you do it before you're supposed to, your pelvis could be like lopsided or something. There's so many. I just was, I was both scared and excited because I wanted to move forward, but I didn't want to rush the healing that was necessary.
Was that difficult mentally, knowing in your mind, like, I could just walk yesterday or run yesterday, but now my body's not actually doing what I can so vividly remember?
Yeah, it started to dawn on me over time. Once you get to a certain point where, like, I would just watch, like, I'd watch those dancing shows or something. Like, those are the ones that really kill me. I start bawling because I watched these, even before I was in my accident. I just think that the human body is this incredible thing, and you can use it for so many beautiful ways, and I love the art of dance. I love watching people do things I never thought was possible. And then, but so, like, sometimes I would just sit. I had one day, I remember watching a bunch of, like, So You Think You Can Dance auditions on YouTube or something, and I'm just bawling because, it's just incredible. To me, I felt like the dancers do not take their bodies for granted. That's their world, that's their temple. And but at the same time, I had to look back at myself. I still wheeled away from the computer that day. Just thinking like, honestly, I didn't care if I could run. I just wanted to dance. And so I still don't really run because it's just too painful. I've re-injured myself a couple times already, but I can dance, and that's all that matters to me.
Wow, and you can walk.
And I can walk, which is huge too.
So eventually people moved on in terms of their lives. You said that you had a lot of support in the beginning, and yet your life had kind of forever changed.
Right.
What was life like for you then? And did you feel any negative emotions like sadness, like why me? Did you have any moments of like feeling alone?
Absolutely. It's, at first it was great. When I was in Chicago, I would be visited by all my friends, every day. It was it's hard because you have such little energy. You could feel who gave it to you or who took it away. So like that gave me a real deep sensitivity to that kind of thing. And then once I was transferred to Alabama, that's when it really set in that I was like, man, I'm in this now. And I was surrounded by all these people.
You were transferred to a rehab center in Alabama to be close to your mom and dad?
Yeah, the same rehab center my aunt had been to when she was paralyzed decades before. So it's like it's really it was an interesting and kind of a beautiful element to it too. I felt very taken care of there in some ways. In other ways, once I finally made it home, people would send meals and stuff, which was awesome. And then slowly, people do just start to move on. Not that they forget, but it's just it's really intense at first. And then once you're sort of you're stable, you're living your life, you just start to have more solitary moments. And
people go back to their like normal lives per se, whereas your normal new life is now in rehab, trying to learn how to walk.
Exactly. Just trying to like get by with we would watch when we first got there, we were watching hummingbirds and drinking tea, and then we'd watch old movies together, me and my mom and my twin brother, who were my primary caretakers, and my dad and stepmom, and everybody would come visit me, and my sister, and we would but there are definitely moments where I couldn't like take a bath or something, or I couldn't like I went to a film festival that was there just because I wanted to get out and do something, but my energy I couldn't last as long as I used to, and then it was just those moments of just like deep fatigue and solitude that was those are the hardest parts for sure.
Did that make you feel lonely and isolated and sad at all?
Absolutely. I mean, the hardest, darkest moment maybe was when I remember I let my mom have it. I didn't mean to, but she just happened to be there, and I needed to express my frustration. And so I essentially just, yelled at her and asked her why, or like just told her I didn't ask for this, And of course, it was nothing that she could have done or changed or anything, but unfortunately, she just happened to be in the room,
So when you were saying, like, I didn't ask for this, like, is that something that you just had been thinking about? And
yeah, I mean, when things like this happen, the way we say it in my family is that the truck didn't just hit me, it hit everybody, and in so many ways that's true, and in some weird ways it hurt them more than it hurt me, because I was given permission to recover, and not everybody else was. At least they didn't give it to themselves. That was my job, was to get better. And everybody else had to sort of somehow both function as who they used to be and who they are today. And, we're still healing as a family. But,
well, they say, times. It's interesting as we've kind of gone through this process of loss and grief and learned a lot more these last, couple months or so. We've learned a lot about how we really focus on the physical healing, but in terms of mental and emotional, we don't always focus on that. And in the grief recovery method, they define grief as the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Do you feel like you had conflicting feelings of happy to be alive, yet negative feelings of just feeling sad? And if so, can you just kind of explain? And
Absolutely. I feel like there's a lot of what I refer to now of a spiritual guilt that I put on myself, where I was, when people keep telling you you're a miracle, you sort of have this, whether you try to or not, you end up adopting this mentality that you are supposed to be something. And that's very difficult.
Wow, that's a heavy burden. A miracle, like when you think about it.
You're right.
And I
And
said
so-
that like it's a miracle, but it must feel like a heavy burden.
It does. I mean, when you allow yourself to get to the point where you think you have to do anything. I mean, I've already done it by I'm alive, but to me that's not even,
But that's not even enough?
That's not even special enough to me. I mean, what I want to do is be amazing and change the world and try to help as many people as I can. That to me would be, but that as, even as I was talking to Taj yesterday.
That's a heavy burden, though.
Something that we can all strive for. I guess I just never wanted to feel so different, Sometimes it is intense for me to be the bearer of this story in some ways. And in other ways it's hard because, when I was in rehab, my doctor said it in a way I'll never forget. He said, "Davis, just remember that you're going to wake up from this nightmare, but not everybody in here is." There was one of the guys I was in rehab with was in a tornado accident. He was like swept up in a tornado 5 months earlier, and he was still in rehab, and he had lost some of his limbs. And some people have permanent brain damage, and we might never hear from them again. So it's this weird thing where it was so real for so long, and now people look at me, they'd have no idea it happened. I refer to it as an invisibility, like this invisible disability that, I'm sort of surprised when people bring it up to me sometimes because I don't wear it. It's easy for people to see some people's disabilities, and that's
Well, if you have the physical loss, it's easy to see, but I think it is like the invisible loss. Mm-hmm. That's where, and that is some sense more difficult and painful to heal too.
Right. I would never, I tried to, it's delicate because I feel like I don't know where I fit in the world. It's kind of an interesting thing. I've worked with people who are deaf, and there's sort of like this dynamic between, either you're fully deaf or you're hearing. And if you're hard of hearing, you don't fit into either category. And so sometimes I feel like I don't know where I fit into it. But I think that's a good way to put it is I think if you lose someone in your life, you lose a loved one, and that's an invisible thing. You can't see that unless you're actually crying constantly, and no one is, So it's one of those things where I don't know. I never thought about this before like this.
So one of the things that we've also been talking about the last couple weeks on the radio show that we've learned, we often hear that when people are going through difficult times and are grieving, that when they need comfort to not feel alone and feel so isolated, that they try to reach out to their family and friends with their feelings, yet sometimes family and friends will give intellectual responses to your emotional appeal with intellectual, like stereotypical sayings that we've sort of absorbed as a society because we're really not taught how to emotionally connect with one another. So there's sayings like, if you say, I feel alone, I feel isolated, I'm having just you're having a moment, then someone can say back to you, like, well, you're so lucky to be alive, count your blessings. Did you ever find this was the case for yourself?
Yeah, and I started to really have to cut some people some slack, because they don't know.
We're not taught.
No one's prepared for this. Mm-hmm. No one in my family took a traumatic accident preparation course or of any sort. Like this.
You didn't take that in elementary school?
No, they didn't offer it,
No?
unfortunately. No, but it just happens to people, And so I learned quickly to not take it personally and to know that I'm no better than they are. I learned, I sort of became like a bedridden therapist for some of my family, or anybody who came to me because, you just have to, I would just sit there. So I really learned how to listen, and I'm still working on that, but that's really the best thing we can do is try to hear each other.
Can you describe your determination in terms of, I'm sure once the accident happened, there's that mental thought of what do I do now? And for a lot of people, that determination, were you determined to walk, or were you hearing from family members pity, and did that swing you one way? Because sometimes people either they accept that pity or they're like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. And
right.
Our Uncle Randy, that happened to him he had a motorcycle accident and he wasn't supposed to walk again. He was determined to dance.
Yeah.
again, and he sent everyone away and said, "You're giving me the wrong energy."
Right.
So I don't know if it's the same similarity, but I don't. Can you explain?
Yeah.
Did you ever have doubt?
I never had doubt. I was gonna say that I did, but the truth is, I was the same way. I was very determined. I will point out that there was a siren. If you heard that happens to me all the time. I mean, they're constant. I hope that those people are all right. But I was very, very determined. I definitely felt like I had some strong gatekeepers in my family who really helped curate the type of people and energy that came into my world, because it was, to me it was. What's crazy is that you're taken to the very edge, and then they say you could make a full recovery, and I was lucky in that regard. So I had no choice. I mean, to me it was like what I couldn't choose any less than full. I was just, to me, I had to. That's why I don't think I had any doubt. I feel like that's why speaking of guilt and things like that, I can't imagine somebody who truly loses a limb or something like that. They probably have a little bit of a hiccup in their spirit, I imagine, but then again, I've seen some incredible stories of paraplegic people, who are just, their spirit is true, and I'm blessed to have so many positive, wonderful people around me, and the title of this show is perfect for that. It really is just so much love. I didn't have a moment. I didn't have a chance to be.
Do you feel like the power of love really helped you through?
100%. I believe. The way I describe it is that so many people were praying for me, thinking about me, sending me love, that it feels like every single bit of them took a tiny fraction of my pain and carried it for themselves, and so I didn't have to. That's what it felt like, because even in those the most physical pain was what was my burden in a way, but all the spiritual and emotional pain that was really carried by a community.
Wow.
TJ, you
David,
still there?
Yeah, I first of all, I can't thank you enough for being on here. You're inspiring so many people, even myself.
Cool.
I have so many questions, but I'm just going to ask one. First of all, I met you Sunday at the cocktail event, and when I heard your story just briefly, I'm so sad that I couldn't be there with you, and thank you in person for sharing this. My question is, I assume you go through those moments even now, today, yesterday, last week, where you're kind of saddened or you're a little down. What is it that you rely on, or what is it that gets your spirits right back up?
Thank you. One of the biggest things for me is my daily practices. To me, when I was in those deepest solitary recovery moments, I needed to develop practices in order to just make every day feel like it had structure and hope. So I start my days with, every single day I journal 3 pages of just whatever I need. I picked that up from a book called The Artist's Way. Morning pages. I know plenty of people are familiar, some in the room. So that's been huge for me. I've been doing that for 5 years now. I got stacks of these journals. Carry it with me everywhere I go. That is huge. I've been meditating since then as well, so I incorporate some of that into my life.
You said actually you were a bit of an atheist before the accident too.
Yeah, I was experimenting in atheism for a while, even though my friend who was a genuine atheist said I was not, because I always said I believed in love. And then when I would describe what I thought love was to him, he's like, "You're not an atheist." So I said, "All right, I'm a lovist." And then, and now I say I'm an artist, because to me art is prayer. So that would be the next thing I do is,
So then you developed your meditation practice once you had the accident?
Yeah, so I meditate. I try to do that. I've explored all different types. I've gone to 10-day silent meditation retreats before. I've just tried to do, at this point I'm doing like 10-15 minutes a day, just and whenever I can. And then I try to go on a walk just to remember, what a gift that is. And so that I try, if I start my day like that, with any combination of those things, but definitely the anchor of the journal, then my day is at least good, if not great.
Do you still feel any pain? I know you said when you run, you get sore. How about walking or anything?
Yes, sometimes. So I still have a screw in my hip that interacts with my IT band. So when I'm in certain positions, it can be extremely painful just out of nowhere. And then also my knee. So my pelvis was broken so much they normally would put a rod through my hip into my femur, but because I was so broke, they had to go through the front of my knee and into my femur. And then they had to take it recently, like 4 years ago, they had to take a screw out of the side of my knee too. So it's just had so much surgery that it just can't, I live at the base of Griffith Park. So I walk up it every day. And it's when I start running that things start to sort of struggle. But just walking is thankfully something I can do.
Yeah, I had one more question real quick.
Sure.
So David, you experienced an incredible, tragic event. What would you suggest that your family or friends could have done better or more of or less of to help you even more?
I would say I wish that they had spent more time on themselves, because it became very easy for everyone to take me on, because I required very little at the time. It would just be either like food or space, or I would my brother had to bring me my toothbrush in bed sometimes just because I was too tired to get up and do all the work it got into. So I think if they one of the hardest things for me was to wake up from my coma and just see everybody struggling. And to this day I say it was harder for them than it was for me. And so I think if they could do anything different, they gave me so much love, but I don't think they might have saved enough for themselves.
And then you did lose part of your colon and intestine, and what did that result in? So
this is the part I don't often reference because it's so it was difficult. I had a colostomy bag, which is for those who aren't familiar, it's when your digestive system has to be redirected to your stomach to a bag that hangs outside of your stomach. So it's a very humbling experience to have. Many people who have it are in their 60, 70 plus years old, or people with Crohn's disease. And so I had it because they had to. It was a way to save my life. They had to move that stuff out of the way. And
but you didn't know if it was going to be permanent or not at that time.
I wasn't sure, and thank God it wasn't. But 7 months of it though. So
how did you feel when you had it?
I lost a lot of my sense of self-love in a way. Like I felt in a weird way like unlovable, and it was like it represented all of that for me because it was my deformity. Of all the broken bones I had, I didn't have a single cast or anything, but I did have this thing on my stomach. So that was to me every day a reminder that I had been through something. So I think of it both affectionately. One of those things that I'm glad it was there, but I'm also so glad that it's gone.
I think you mentioned too that just having it made you feel even more isolated and alone.
Yes, there were very few people. I mean, there's very few people who survive 18-wheeler encounters, but there's also very few people who have colostomies as well. So I looked online. I found this one girl who was around my age who had Crohn's disease, and she had a colostomy, and she really helped me feel, I felt like the way I said it is I had to get my sexy back, because it's very unsexy. It's like the opposite of that. And, thank God I have, who is now my fiance. I had just met her 5 years ago. She was in my life, and she made me feel like I wasn't, sometimes that, luckily I could hide it under my shirt, but still it made me feel sometimes like a mutant or something. Like it just wasn't a normal thing. And whether I like to admit that that it was the hard part for me, it doesn't matter. It was just that was the toughest part.
And why do you leave it out of the story normally?
People don't like hearing about it, truth be told. And maybe I'm projecting that, but it's not always, I've never brought it up at a party and had people be like, "Oh, cool, very, very cool, man, nice." Yeah. It's usually
it makes us uncomfortable to think about.
It does. It makes me uncomfortable. I so many blessings to the people who own that part of themselves.
If somebody's going through this right now, what would you say to them?
I would say you're beautiful, and you know, whatever you're doing to adjust your life in that way, like your spirit is strong, because I do feel like, you know, I wouldn't say, to me that's like trying to, you know, change myself if I were to avoid it when I had it. I you know, you have to own it, and I think anybody who owns that part of themselves or anything like it is brave, and is a better person for the humility that it brings.
Do you feel like you were going through conflicting emotions with this, that you're happy to be alive, but yet at the same time you have this bag on you, and it was making you feel, I think you said, kind of disgusting?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, it's sometimes when you are a quote-unquote miracle, you feel like maybe it's a little bit hard for you to complain about anything. Even though people were always giving me permission to do that. It was, you know, again, I'm just so lucky to be alive. So,
but you're not allowed to have feelings of sadness or having a moment where you feel like it's a hard day.
I wouldn't say that was anyone's fault, but even my own. I mean, it's just. So
I feel like it's the pressure we put on ourselves,
right,
too, in terms of society.
Definitely, it's definitely there is a, you know, I've seen some videos of like funerals from other cultures, and people just weep, you know, and I feel like we don't often allow ourselves to here in America. There's not as much, you know, like sometimes I think about it, some good honest cries that I've had, and I could probably count them on a couple hands, you know.
Did you seem like you went online a lot to search for answers? Because I hear that.
Yeah.
Did you find your answers online?
I found some, you know, and I started to, eventually I kind of started to write and put stuff out there, because just like we were doing in, you know, when I was volunteering for the foundation yesterday.
Davis came to our music therapy class yesterday and worked with the teens.
It was awesome.
Did you have a good experience?
I had a great experience. You know, I love those kids. Amazing. But I feel like, you know, the same way that writing a song about something that means something to you, whether you're the person who puts it out there or whether you're the person who hears it, you feel less alone in that interaction, in that transaction. So when you go and you post something online, or, you know, if that girl hadn't had a blog about her experience as a college student with a colostomy bag, then I would have felt so much more isolated. I'm so grateful to her, and I don't even know if I could find her again. You know, it was just that specific time. And of course, when you don't have one anymore, you don't even want to go there, but I'm so grateful to her.
And you actually were writing music too. You were in a band at the time.
Right.
Can you tell us some more about that, and then the song that you wrote?
Sure. So I had to think, because I've written a lot of ideas, and I forgot that I had done a verse for this one tune. My band was called Why So White. It was a kind of a 6 or 7 piece funk band from Chicago. We were blessed to be able to, you know, open for George Clinton at one time, you know, which was a rite of passage in the funk world, you know. It was so much fun, you know. We would wear like neon boas and tights, and I used to have a beard and long hair, and it was just wild fun. And so I wrote this one. So, you know, the way we would write is it was a huge collaborative effort. So one of the guitar player, Chris Miller, wrote this riff, and then I came over one day. It was the 2-year anniversary of my accident, and I just started singing this hook. It ended up becoming this song called Keep My Cool. And it was, you know, like, no matter what I get into, you know, I'm always keeping my cool, because that's sort of what I realized I had to do, you know, because life is always coming at you. So you had to you have to find a way to me, that was like, you know, breathing and finding your base level, you know, vibration, so to speak. I think we also talked about another meaning to it as well last night, right? Which one? About your mom. Oh yeah, definitely. Connecting blowing it to up your on my mom. Yeah, I still to this day, you know. Because you didn't keep your cool that time. I definitely didn't, you know, and it was both. I mean, you know, it was painful for both of us, but I'm also really glad I was able to have a moment to let that out, you know. So well, having that too, because oftentimes when we go through these traumatic events, we're just stuffing the emotions down because we're not allowing ourselves to express them in pieces, and then all of a sudden it can volcano out, which then can surprise the person that is actually having the intense emotion, as well as the person that is then it's being directed at. Right. So then I feel like part of this song really kind of... This was me, you know, this was like, we used to think that all of our songs were represented colors and things. This was like blue for me, you know, because I feel like what I did with my mom was definitely red, you know, it was on fire. So this was me trying to be more like, you know, how can I be, you know, maintain my cool and not, you know, like even just like driving in LA, you know, somebody cuts you in line, you know, or whatever, you've got to find that cool. So that was more for me, you know. I definitely believe in expression, and we've got other tunes that were like that, but this was that blue moment, you know.
So this song is called Keep My Cool.
Keep My Cool.
So we're gonna play a little bit right now.
When we were young, when we were young, when we were young, when we were young. When we were young, when we were young, when we were young.
Full of questions and never satisfied with answers. I was a dancer, even with my body broken, guided by voices ever since the sun has spoken. An Alabama boy dead on the avenue. Chicago tried to kill me, but knew it wasn't through. I still got work to do, still gotta keep my cool. That's why I went to space and got some cosmic overview. The universe is a teacher and I was overdue. I ain't afraid of death and wasn't even 22. My poetry is just interpretations of my scars. The ink in my pen is blood dripping from my heart. I try to do my part, I wear my heart up on my sleeve. Love is invisible, made visible if you believe. I'm always digging deeper cause I ain't afraid of pain. I ain't afraid to live inside my body and get out my brain. I ain't afraid to ask you for your touch because I know I need it. My soul's a monster and love's the only way to feed it. My mama tried to help me and feel and know the strength of my blood is real. And even though the screws on my hips are kids with disability, I never hesitate to lock your eyes and know you're feeling me. Life is a lesson and death may be the hardest, so I express myself and know I'm blessed to be an artist.
What I get into, you know I'm always keeping my cool. I'm always keeping my cool. No matter what I get into, you know I'm always keeping my cool. You know I'm always keeping my cool. No matter what I get into, you know I'm always keeping my cool. You know I'm always keeping. No matter what I get into, you know I'm always keeping my cool. You know I'm always keeping my cool. Life is just a dream.
Cool.
That's amazing.
Great.
Great
I
job.
like that.
Thank you.
So can you purchase the song? Where can you buy it?
Yeah, we are no longer a band. We are defunct, as it were. But you can get it at wisesowhite.bandcamp.com for free if you want it like that.
So if there are any listeners who are currently going through hardship of loss of health right now, what do you wish that you had heard when you were recovering, or what could possibly help them?
I guess, you know, one of my favorite records that I heard at that time, I ended up watching the Martin Scorsese, George Harrison documentary. And he has that record, This Too Shall Pass. And that was huge for me because there were nights just of pure pain. And it's hard to know when you're in the middle of it, like in the middle of the storm, that it's going to pass. But it does. It always does. Every single time. And that is so key to remember because I got so much stronger when I learned how to just ride the wave instead of swimming against it and getting sucked under, you know.
I think that can apply for everything.
Absolutely. That's what came to me, so there you go.
What would you say is the biggest difference between you then and you now?
Wow. Man, you know, I always joke because you can hear from like the first record, we only made 2 records. First record to the second one. The first one I just was a boy, you know, just singing about girls mostly. And just, you know, just having fun and just, you know, I was carefree, you know, I just had nothing no worries. You know, of course, everyone has things, but I wasn't aware of it. I wouldn't let it in. And now I see things in people that I didn't see before, and I feel like I have. You know, sometimes it's a little bit intense just to be walking around and to feel like you can see people's stories, but I think that's one of the gifts of having gone to that place, is that you can always go back. And so I think now, you know, but even before my accident, I volunteered with people with disabilities and with kids, and I was always working with people, but now it has a completely new meaning because it feels like it is, in a way, a matter of life or death. You know, we only have this opportunity right now to make things happen. So like Taj said yesterday, I too am just trying to leave the world a better place than when I found it.
Yeah.
That's true. So we are fundraising for our Music Heals music therapy class for kids who are suffering loss and grief to find hope and inspiration through learning how to write and record their own story into a song. And we hope that if you find what we're doing is helpful to you, then you will help us turn grief into positive action. A donation of any amount will make a huge impact on a child's life and empower them to grieve, grow, and heal. Thank you very much for considering this opportunity to make a difference with us. Please spread the word. The more donations and support we have, then the more children we can help. And Davis has experienced our music therapy class, so you could probably attest to what we're doing there.
It's a powerful thing, you know. Not many people have the opportunity to express their voice in such a beautiful, melodic, and a way in which we can share it and feel less alone together. So I think what these guys are doing here is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Davis, so much for joining us. And we aren't licensed therapists. We're just people who've experienced death and loss in our lives and have been impacted by it. Davis, do you have a website or anything that you...
Yeah, it's in progress, but davishaynes.com. You can go there. I've got all the music that, you know, from my bands up on there right now, and a few other things. So you can check me out there.
And you're still doing music?
Davis, please write a book too, because
cool.
I'm the first one reading it. You're such an inspiration, man.
Thanks, man. I'm definitely, when it's time, I will definitely be ready. Thank you.
And to all listeners, we will be here again next Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you have questions that you want answered, please send them to us via social media. Visit us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And if you're listening to the recording of our show and want to share your questions that you have about loss and grief, then Taj is going to read our handles for us.
Yes, Twitter is at DDJ Foundation. Facebook is DEE Jackson Foundation. Instagram is at DEE Jackson Foundation. And the website is www.ddjf.org.
Yay, thank you so much. And please follow us. And thank you, Davis, for being here with us
thank
today.
you.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Take care, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Davis.
Thank you for listening to The Power of Love. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Support for our Power of Love radio show comes from a variety of generous donors, including supporters from institutions, individuals, and corporations through the Dee Dee Jackson Foundation. DDJF is a nonprofit 501c3 organization.